You've been misled about peace. They told you it comes from controlling your life, fixing everything, avoiding pain. But if that were true, why are your thoughts still so loud at night? Why do you feel drained even when nothing's gone wrong? Why does your mind feel like it's always running, even when your body's still? The truth is, peace isn't outside you. It's not in the job, the relationship, the routine. It's already inside you. It's just buried under habits, overthinking, pressure, noise. Buddhism isn't about escaping the world. It's about seeing it clearly. It's not about being perfect. It's about being free. Free from stress, free from the stories in your head, free from the need to be anything other than fully present. For thousands of years, Buddhist monks, teachers, and seekers have followed a simple path. Not to heaven, not to some distant goal, but to the stillness that's already here, right now, underneath all the chaos. Tonight, as you listen, something will shift. The storm in your chest will soften, your thoughts will slow down, and that heavy feeling you've been carrying, it'll start to melt. You'll remember how to just be, not chase, not fight, not resist, just be. And when you wake up tomorrow, your heart will feel lighter, your breath easier, and the world quieter. This isn't just audio to help you sleep. It's a reset button for your mind, a doorway into a new way of living, still, clear, awake. Are you ready to remember the peace you've always had? Let's begin. You've been absorbing noise your whole life. Sounds, screens, voices, opinions, thoughts that don't stop, notifications that pull your focus, conversations that leave you tired. And silence, true silence, has become so rare that most people don't even realize they're afraid of it. But what if the silence you've been avoiding is the very thing you've been searching for? There is a kind of silence in Buddhism that isn't emptiness, it's presence. A silence that speaks louder than words ever could. It's called Aryo Tunhibhavo, noble silence. Not just the absence of speech, but the presence of awareness. A way of being that cuts through the noise, not just outside of you, but inside. That's what we're entering now. In the modern world, silence is often confused with loneliness. People fill every gap with music, messages, scrolling, or small talk, because stillness feels uncomfortable. But here's the truth. That discomfort is exactly where the healing begins. When you stop running from the silence, you start discovering who you really are beneath all the noise. Buddhist monks have long practiced noble silence, not as a punishment, but as a path. During retreats, they may go days, weeks, even months without speaking. Not because they dislike communication, but because they understand something most people don't, that words are only one layer of reality. Beneath language is a deeper understanding, a knowing that can't be explained, only experienced. When you step into noble silence, the first thing you notice is how much chatter your mind is addicted to. It's constant. Planning, judging, reliving, analyzing. It narrates your life like a sports commentator that never turns off. But silence reveals that the narrator is not you. It's just noise. And you are the space underneath it. You are the awareness that hears it all. This kind of silence is a detox, not from food, but from thought, from the noise you didn't even realize was stressing you out. When you stop speaking, your body begins to soften. Your nervous system starts to recalibrate. Your heart rate slows down. Your breathing deepens. Because silence is not passive, it's medicine. It invites the body back into balance. It whispers to the nervous system, "You're safe now." Science is starting to catch up to what monks have known for centuries. Studies show that even 2 minutes of silence can lower blood pressure and decrease cortisol, the stress hormone. Silence activates the brain's default mode network, the system responsible for self-reflection and inner processing. In other words, silence makes you more aware, more creative, and more connected to yourself. But this isn't about just turning off your phone and lighting a candle. Noble silence isn't just external, it's internal. You can be quiet and still be caught in mental noise. You can sit alone and still be arguing with someone in your head. True noble silence is the art of stepping back from both the outer and inner noise. It's choosing not to speak aloud and also not to speak mentally. It's observing without reacting, being present without narrating. And here's where the real transformation happens. When you practice noble silence long enough, something incredible starts to shift. You begin to notice the space between your thoughts, that tiny gap where stillness lives. At first, it's fleeting, a moment here, a second there. But over time, that space expands. The gaps get longer, and in those gaps, something ancient and peaceful awakens. You start hearing things you missed before, the sound of wind through trees, the rhythm of your own breath, the gentle hum of life itself. These details were always there, but you were too loud inside to notice. Silence doesn't add anything. It reveals everything. It takes away the extra so you can see what's always been underneath. And the benefits don't stop at calmness. Noble silence changes the way you relate to others. You start listening, not just waiting for your turn to speak, but really listening, without the urge to interrupt, without needing to fix, prove, or impress. You become more present, more patient. Your words carry more weight because you're not speaking from impulse, you're speaking from clarity. In fact, silence can often say more than words ever could. It holds space for others to feel safe. It allows emotions to rise without being judged or shut down. In a world addicted to over-explaining, noble silence becomes an act of compassion. You stop needing to fill every pause. You learn to honor what's unfolding without trying to control it. Some people think silence is weakness, that it means you don't know what to say. But in Buddhism, silence is strength. It takes more courage to be still than to react, more power to hold presence than to prove a point. And when you stop trying to be right all the time, you start being real. You show up with humility, not ego, with openness, not defense. This discipline also helps dissolve emotional reactivity. Think about the last time someone made you angry. Your instinct may have been to lash out, defend yourself, or shut down. But what if, instead of reacting, you paused in silence? Just 5 seconds, no words, just breath. That space is where wisdom lives. In that pause, you interrupt the pattern. You allow emotion to rise, pass through, and teach you something. Buddhist teacher Ajahn Chah once said, "If you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace." Noble silence is one of the simplest ways to start letting go of noise, of tension, of false urgency. And in that letting go, peace begins to rise. You may notice that silence also shifts your relationship with time. Without constant talking or stimulation, time begins to stretch. A minute feels fuller, an hour feels spacious. That's because you're no longer rushing past the present moment. You're inside it. You're living in real time, not in the mental clock of anxiety. The mind races, but silence walks. And there's a hidden gift here, one that's not often talked about. In silence, you start to reconnect with your intuition, that quiet knowing that doesn't shout. It whispers. It's been speaking all along, but it was drowned out by the mental noise. As you become more still, the voice of your inner wisdom grows clearer. It doesn't give you all the answers, but it points you toward truth. Noble silence is also a way to reconnect with your breath, because without words to distract you, your attention naturally returns to your body. You feel the inhale, the exhale, the rise and fall. You realize that even when the mind is chaotic, the breath is steady. It becomes an anchor, a reminder that no matter what's happening, you are still here. And here's something powerful. When you learn to rest in silence, you stop seeking so much from the world. You stop needing constant entertainment, validation, or distraction. You stop chasing peace because you're already rooted in it. Noble silence is like a homecoming, a return to the simple truth that you are already enough, even when you say nothing at all. But let's be honest. At first, silence can feel awkward, even scary. You might notice restlessness, boredom, irritation. That's normal. It's your nervous system adjusting. You've been trained to fill every second. Noble silence breaks that habit. It reconditions your brain to find safety in stillness. At first, it's unfamiliar, but with practice, it becomes the most natural thing in the world. And you don't need a monastery or retreat to begin. You can practice noble silence right where you are. Start with small moments. A quiet morning without reaching for your phone. A car ride without music. A walk without headphones. You'll notice how quickly your mind reaches for stimulation and how powerful it feels to not give in. You can also practice mindful speech reduction. Maybe you don't speak unless it's kind, necessary, or true. That alone transforms the quality of your communication. You start choosing your words instead of spilling them. Silence creates intention, and intention creates peace. And this extends into writing, posting, even thinking. You become more selective about where your energy goes. You stop giving attention to drama, gossip, or noise. You learn to say less, observe more, and that simple shift changes everything. You become calmer, clearer, more centered. You stop reacting to life and start responding to it. Over time, noble silence helps dissolve the false self, the one that constantly needs to talk, defend, or be seen. And in that space, your deeper self begins to emerge. Not the persona, not the mask, but the part of you that's timeless, grounded, unshaken, the part of you that watches the thoughts without becoming them. In the Buddhist tradition, the Buddha himself was known to teach through silence. In one famous story, a disciple asked him a deep question about the nature of reality. The Buddha responded with silence. That silence was the answer, because some truths can't be explained, they must be experienced, and noble silence creates the space for that experience to unfold. So here's the invitation. Stop chasing more. More knowledge, more advice, more words. Start listening to the space between. Start honoring the stillness beneath the story. Let your nervous system settle. Let your breath guide you. Let your awareness deepen. There's nothing you need to fix right now. Nothing to prove. Just be here, in this quiet, in this presence, in this peace that has always been waiting for you. And from this silence, something new is born. A new way of being, one that doesn't rely on noise to feel alive, one that doesn't panic in stillness, one that feels strong, centered, and whole, simply by resting in what is. This is the power of noble silence, not emptiness, but fullness, not absence, but presence, and it's been with you all along. Let's keep going. Silence reveals more than calm. It reveals the parts of you that aren't really you. The longer you sit without distraction, the clearer it becomes. So much of what you've believed about yourself wasn't yours to begin with. The opinions, the roles, the labels, they were adopted, not chosen. And the question starts to rise from that silence like smoke after fire. Who am I really beneath all of this? Most people carry their identity like armor. It seems to protect, but it also traps. It keeps you in a shape you've outgrown. It limits how deeply you can feel, how freely you can live. And here's the truth Buddhism offers. Who you think you are is not who you really are. The belief that you are a solid, fixed self, that's the root of more suffering than you realize. There's a word for this in Buddhist philosophy, anatta, non-self. Not in the sense that you don't exist, but in the sense that there is no permanent, unchanging thing called you behind your thoughts, memories, emotions, and preferences. You are a process, a stream, a movement of life. But the ego doesn't like that idea. It wants to be someone. It wants a story to hold on to. It wants a role, a name, a face that lasts forever. But that craving for a solid identity is exhausting. It's like trying to keep a sandcastle from collapsing while the tide is rising. You keep rebuilding who you think you should be, strong, successful, likable, confident, and then life knocks it down, and you start again, over and over. That cycle wears you down because it's built on a misunderstanding, on the idea that me is a thing to protect rather than a veil to see through. Non-self doesn't mean you disappear. It means you let go of what isn't real. You drop the false narratives that say you must always be this or never be that. It means you stop holding on to your pain like a badge. You stop repeating the sentence, "That's just how I am," as if it's a life sentence. You start seeing that everything about you, your habits, your moods, your beliefs, is changing all the time. So why cling to any of it as permanent? Think about how often you describe yourself with labels. I'm anxious. I'm a perfectionist. I'm not creative. These seem like facts, but they're not. They're thoughts you've repeated so often they feel real. But under the lens of awareness, they dissolve. They're just stories, and stories can be rewritten. The idea that you are one fixed thing is just that, an idea, an assumption that creates unnecessary tension in the body, unnecessary judgment in the mind, and unnecessary fear in the heart. Clinging to identity also makes you defensive. When someone challenges your beliefs, it feels like they're attacking you. So you react, not to what's being said, but to the threat to your ego. But when you no longer see your beliefs as who you are, you become freer to listen, to change, to grow. You stop taking things so personally. You realize there is no self to protect, only patterns to observe. This shift opens up space in your mind. So much of your mental energy goes into reinforcing identity. You seek validation. You avoid embarrassment. You compare yourself constantly, trying to measure who you are against everyone else. But if you let go of that fixation on me, the competition stops. You no longer need to prove yourself to anyone, because there's no fixed self to prove. Buddhist meditation practices like Vipassana reveal this through direct experience. When you observe your mind closely, you notice that thoughts arise and pass, sensations arise and pass, emotions arise and pass. And in all of this, where is the you? It's not in the thoughts, they change. It's not in the feelings, they shift. It's not in the body, it ages. What you find is that you are the awareness watching it all, not the content being watched. And this awareness doesn't need identity to function. It doesn't need to say, I am this. It just is. It sees, it knows, and it rests in peace because it isn't trying to hold anything in place. This understanding also softens your grip on the past. Many people suffer because they feel defined by what happened to them. They replay stories of failure, heartbreak, shame, and wear them like armor. But those memories are not who you are. They are experiences that happened in the flow of time. They shaped you, yes, but they do not define you. When you understand non-self, the past stops being a cage. It becomes a chapter, not the whole book. Letting go of identity also transforms how you deal with emotions. When you think, "I am angry," it becomes personal. You identify with the anger and feel trapped by it. But when you see that anger is just a temporary mental event, not a part of your identity, you can observe it without getting lost in it. You can let it pass like weather. This subtle shift changes everything. You stop drowning in your emotions because you no longer claim them as mine. Even your voice, your style, your quirks, none of them are solid. They arise through conditions, through your upbringing, your influences, your environment. Letting go of self doesn't erase uniqueness. It reveals its impermanence. It lets you enjoy who you are without needing to hold it in place. You can be light, playful, fluid. You don't have to fit into the same shape every day. This flexibility is freedom. You become like water, able to move, adapt, shift without losing your essence. That's what non-self really is, not the death of personality, but the release of rigidity. You stop trying to be consistent for the sake of others' expectations. You stop performing. You start living. And this also changes how you relate to others. When you stop needing to be someone, you stop needing others to be someone too. You can see people beyond their roles. You stop boxing them into categories. You stop judging so quickly. Because you've seen how slippery identity is in yourself, you start offering that same compassion to others. You also stop being so attached to your preferences. When your identity is based on being a certain way, smart, funny, deep, original, you become fragile. You defend those traits. You filter your experiences through them. But when you let go of needing to be a certain kind of person, you open yourself to everything. You can try new things, make mistakes, be wrong, learn. Your life expands. And this goes deeper still, because once you stop identifying with your mind and personality, you begin to access something deeper than both. A sense of aliveness that doesn't depend on thought. A quiet presence that feels whole without needing to be anything. This is the state that many meditators describe as pure awareness or beingness. It's not a trance, it's not escape. It's a deep intimacy with life, unfiltered by ego. This is why Buddhist teachers don't talk much about building up identity. They talk about dropping it. Not because identity is evil, but because it's heavy. Because when you stop clinging to being you, you become free to be real. You don't need a mask to hide behind. You don't need a narrative to hold together. You can just show up, honestly, fully, freshly. Even the idea of spiritual identity, I'm enlightened, I'm awakened, I'm spiritual, becomes another trap. Because now you're clinging to a better version of ego. But ego is ego, whether it calls itself a guru or a failure. The real freedom comes not from having a better self, but from seeing through self entirely. This doesn't mean you forget your name, stop using words like I, or reject your life story. It means you hold it all more lightly. You see that your name is useful, but not essential. That your story is meaningful, but not who you are. You see that identity is a tool, not a truth. And tools are meant to be picked up and put down, not clung to. From this place, decisions become easier. because you're not making choices to defend who you are. You're making choices based on clarity, presence, truth. You're not trying to protect your image. You're responding to life. Your actions become more natural, your mind more still, your relationships more authentic. There's a reason the Buddha taught non-self not as a theory, but as a doorway to peace. Because when you're no longer obsessed with me, the world stops revolving around your story. You start seeing things as they are. You listen more. You suffer less. You become more generous because there's less ego to feed. More open because there's less identity to defend. And eventually, you find a kind of peace that isn't based on anything, not on achievement, not on being seen, not even on being understood, just a deep resting in what is, a freedom that doesn't come from fixing life, but from no longer needing to fix yourself. Because the truth is, who you are has never been a solid thing. You are a river, always moving, always flowing, and it's only when you stop trying to hold the river still that you start to feel the peace of its current. From here, we move forward, not as someone trying to become something, but as awareness, letting go of the need to be anything at all. When you stop clinging to the story of who you think you are, something unexpected starts to unfold. Not just relief or freedom, but space. Space where reactions used to live. Space where self-judgment once shouted. Space that feels unfamiliar at first. But inside that space is your access to something you've overlooked again and again. Your natural capacity to care. Not as a role, not to be good, but because underneath all the self-defending, what's left is a heart that wants to meet this moment with presence. This is where compassion begins, not in theories or declarations, but in tiny flashes of awareness, in the heat of frustration, in the sting of rejection, in the quiet ache of loneliness. And in these ordinary moments, you don't need long meditations or deep teachings to reconnect with it. You need something simple, quick, direct. And that's where the sublime abodes enter: metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha. 4 powerful emotional states, not as ideals, but as tools you can use in 10 seconds or less. These are not distant Buddhist philosophies meant for monasteries. They're emotional technologies you can install into your life right now, especially when your nervous system is screaming, when your heart feels tight, when your mind is spinning. And they work not because they erase what you're feeling, but because they hold what you're feeling in a new way. Metta is loving kindness, the soft warmth of goodwill. It doesn't mean you approve of everything or let people walk over you. It means you drop the weapon in your hand, whether it's aimed at someone else or yourself, and you choose to relate with care, even silently, even briefly. In the middle of an argument or a stressful day, metta is the quiet thought. May I be kind, may they be safe. Just that. 1 second of softening, 1 second of opening the fist. Most people think compassion is this grand gesture, but Buddhist compassion, karuna, is the exact opposite. It's the simple willingness to be present with suffering without trying to fix it or run from it. It's saying to someone silently, I see your pain, I care. That's it. No rescuing, no performing, just presence. And that presence heals more than any advice could. You can use karuna in the tiniest moments, when you see a stranger stressed, when your friend is hurting, even when you feel your own inner critic rising. 1 deep breath, 1 mental whisper. This is hard, and it matters. That's compassion, not solving, just staying close. Then there's mudita, the one we often forget. Sympathetic joy, the art of celebrating others' happiness without comparison. In a world that constantly trains you to compete, Mudita rewires you to celebrate. It's seeing someone succeed and letting your heart say, "Yes, I'm happy for you," even if you didn't win, even if you feel behind. This is powerful training. It cuts through jealousy at the root, because when you rejoice in others' joy, you stop shrinking your own capacity to feel joy at all. Mudita doesn't need words, just a pause when you see something beautiful happening to someone else, and the quiet intention to join them in that light. It expands your emotional range. It reminds your nervous system that joy is safe, and that another person's happiness doesn't threaten yours. And holding all of this together is upekkha, equanimity, the steady hand in the storm, not coldness, not indifference, but the deep stability that allows you to stay centered no matter what arises. It's the whisper in the mind, "This too belongs," not in the sense that everything is okay, but that everything is held. Equanimity lets you care without collapsing. It gives you balance when things feel chaotic. It helps you return to presence when you've been pulled off course. Equanimity doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you don't drown in the feeling. It gives your nervous system a signal of safety. I can be with this. Whether it's pain or joy, grief or gratitude, equanimity helps you stay open, grounded, and responsive. Now here's the most important part. These aren't things you wait to feel. They're practices, choices, shifts you can make in micro moments. The world trains you to react instantly, to guard yourself, to judge. But Buddhism invites you to insert space, a breath, a whisper of kindness, a moment of release. You train your brain to reach for metta instead of anger, karuna instead of coldness, mudita instead of comparison, upekkha instead of panic. You can practice them anywhere, in traffic, in a conversation, in your own spiral of thoughts. You notice tension rising, and instead of following it, you meet it with one of the sublime abodes. It doesn't need to be dramatic. 10 seconds, even 5. That's enough to shift your emotional chemistry. That's enough to remind your mind, I'm not a victim of this moment. I have a choice. And the more you do it, the more natural it becomes. These 4 qualities begin to feel like muscle memory. You don't need to force them. You remember them, like turning on a light in a dark room. The room doesn't have to change. You just need to see it clearly, with presence, with warmth, with balance. What makes these practices so powerful is their direction. Metta goes outward, inward, everywhere. Karuna leans in toward pain. Mudita lifts with joy. Upekkha stays still in the middle. Together, they form an emotional compass. And every time you use them, even briefly, you're rewiring your nervous system to respond rather than react. To feel more, not less, but from a place that doesn't shatter. And this isn't about perfection. You won't always remember. You'll snap sometimes. You'll feel numb. You'll compare. That's okay. What matters is the return. The gentle pivot back to care, back to steadiness, back to joy. These qualities are always available. They don't wait for the perfect moment. They create the perfect moment. You can even use them with your breath. One inhale, one quality. Exhale, let it land. Inhale metta, may I be kind. Exhale. Inhale karuna, this hurts and I care. Exhale. Inhale mudita, may we all rejoice. Exhale. Inhale upekkha, may I stay steady. Exhale. 10 seconds. 1 cycle. Everything changes. And this isn't just emotional. It's physical. These micro practices impact your heart rate, your muscle tension, your hormone levels. They restore coherence to your body's rhythms. They shift you out of fight or flight and into rest and respond. They bring you back to the present with dignity and strength. You can use the sublime abodes during conflict, not to win, but to stay grounded. In a heated moment, ask, can I respond with metta instead of defensiveness? When someone's struggling and you don't know what to say, can I offer silent karuna instead of fixing? When envy arises, can I invite mudita and grow instead of shrinking? When overwhelmed, can I rest in upekkha and trust what's unfolding? This is emotional training, not for perfection, but for presence. It creates a whole new way of living, one that doesn't wait for peace to arrive, but brings it into each moment like a hidden seed. You begin to notice how often the mind tries to close, to guard, to judge, and you learn to open it instead, softly, quickly, precisely. Even in your inner world, these qualities apply. When your inner critic speaks harshly, you can meet it with metta. When shame rises, meet it with karuna. When something beautiful happens within you, celebrate it with mudita. When fear floods your system, meet it with upekkha. You don't have to silence your emotions, you just hold them differently. This is why the sublime abodes are called Brahmaviharas, divine dwellings. Not because they belong in heaven, but because they turn ordinary moments into sacred ground. Because when you live inside these qualities, even for a few seconds, you touch something timeless, something that doesn't break when the world shakes. And you'll start to see the ripple effect. People will feel different around you, not because you're preaching, but because you're being. You respond with care, and it invites care in return. You listen more, and others soften. You celebrate others, and the room lifts. Your steadiness becomes contagious. You're not controlling anyone, you're simply offering a presence that feels safe to be around. In that way, micro-compassion becomes not just a practice, but a transmission. A quiet revolution in how you meet the world. One moment at a time. No grand declarations. Just presence. Just practice. Just a heart that knows how to hold this life with both strength and tenderness. From here, everything becomes a chance to return. Not just the beautiful moments, but the hard ones. Especially the hard ones. Because those are the moments that test your capacity and also build it. This is emotional alchemy, taking what's raw, reactive, painful, and meeting it with the exact energy that transforms it, not suppressing, not bypassing, but holding it in a way that allows it to shift. These qualities don't erase suffering. They teach you how to carry it without it carrying you away. And so, in 10 seconds, you begin again. One breath, one shift, one sacred pause in the middle of life. That's all it takes to come home to who you've always been beneath the layers. Someone capable of love, compassion, joy, and balance. Not as theory, but as real-time experience. This is how peace becomes practical, how mindfulness becomes embodied, how compassion becomes immediate. It's not something to find later, it's something to choose now, and now again, and again. You've just learned how compassion can be activated in an instant, how one breath, one quiet shift can change the whole shape of your emotional world. But what about the thoughts that come before the emotion? The ones that trigger the reaction, feed the anxiety, distort the story. That's where many people get stuck. Because feelings don't arise from nowhere, they're born from thoughts. And thoughts are slippery. They wear disguises, they sound convincing. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of them are just noise pretending to be truth, and you've been believing them without realizing it. Vipassana, the insight meditation of Buddhism, doesn't ask you to stop thinking. It asks you to look closer, to see what a thought really is, not just the words it uses, but the sensations it creates, the mood it brings, the narrative it feeds. This practice is like mental surgery. You learn to pull thoughts apart, to see what they're made of, and in doing so, you take back the power they've held over you. You stop being trapped by what your mind says and start seeing through it with clarity. The first thing to understand is this: thoughts aren't facts. They're not commands. They're not reliable reflections of reality. They're events in consciousness, no more solid than a breeze across your face. But when you don't see them clearly, they feel like truth. They trigger emotions, they shape your identity, they push you into actions you later regret. So before you can respond skillfully to life, you have to know what you're actually responding to. That begins with observation. In Vipassana, the goal isn't to block or judge your thoughts, it's to study them, like a scientist with a microscope. When a thought arises, you pause, you notice it, you stay with it, not to believe it, not to fight it, just to see what it really is. And what you begin to notice is that a thought is rarely just a thought. It's a full-body event. Take anxiety, for example. On the surface, it looks like a single thought. What if something bad happens? But if you slow down, you'll see it has layers. Underneath the sentence, there's a tightness in the chest, a quickening of the breath, a clenching in the jaw, a sense of unease in the gut. Then comes the mood, restlessness, anticipation, dread. And all of this is tied to one mental sentence you didn't even mean to think. Vipassana teaches you to deconstruct this, to take the thought off its pedestal and see it for what it is: a sound in the mind, a string of symbols, a habit pattern, not reality, but a lens. And as you practice, you start to recognize the patterns. You begin to hear the familiar tone of judgment, the rhythm of worry, the echo of old stories. And each time you see them clearly, their grip loosens a little more. This practice works because it separates the components of experience. You start to see that your suffering doesn't come from the situation itself, but from how your mind interprets it. A sound is just a sound, until your mind labels it annoying. A glance is just a glance, until your mind decides it meant disrespect. That label is a thought. That interpretation is a thought. And when you see that, you can pause before the emotion takes over. The core skill here is noting. When a thought arises, you mentally label it, not with judgment, but with clarity. Planning, remembering, judging, worrying, replaying, fantasizing. This tiny act of labeling puts space between you and the thought. It's like stepping out of the river and watching it flow instead of being swept away by it. You stop being the thinker and become the observer. And this isn't just a mental trick, it's a nervous system shift. Because when you're inside a thought, your body reacts. Stress hormones release, muscles tense, your whole system prepares for a threat. But when you observe the thought instead, your system calms. You're no longer bracing against a storm. You're watching clouds pass across the sky. Vipassana also teaches you to notice the tone of thoughts. Not just the content, but the feeling behind it. Some thoughts are sharp and critical. Others are slippery and sneaky. Some carry a heaviness. Others feel inflated or urgent. By tuning into this tone, you learn to detect when the mind is agitated, even before the content makes sense. You begin to notice the energy before the narrative. This is important because thoughts often lie, not in words, but in their energy. They come with urgency that doesn't match reality. They come with certainty that isn't based on fact. They pretend to be logical when they're actually fear in disguise. When you recognize this, you stop taking the bait. You stop getting pulled into spirals. You stay rooted in the body, grounded in what's real. The next layer is the story. Every mind has one, sometimes many. The story of, I always mess things up. The story of, no one understands me. The story of, I'm not doing enough. These aren't just thoughts, they're themes, narratives that have played so many times they've become familiar. But familiar doesn't mean true. And once you see that the story is being told, you also realize it can be let go. Deconstructing the story doesn't mean arguing with it. It means noticing its components. What emotions does it trigger? What assumptions does it rest on? What memories does it use as evidence? Vipassana helps you zoom out. You stop staring at the story like a movie on a screen, and you step back to see the projector. You see that what you're experiencing is a construction, not a truth, just a pattern playing out. This practice also helps with emotions that seem overwhelming, because when you break the emotion down into sensations, you realize it's not as solid as it felt. Sadness isn't one big thing. It's a heaviness in the chest, a lump in the throat, a slowness in the limbs. Anger isn't a fireball. It's heat in the face, tightness in the fists, pressure in the head. When you see it like this, you stop being overpowered. You realize the emotion is something you can hold piece by piece without getting consumed. And this is the deeper teaching of Vipassana. Clarity comes from contact, not from escaping your thoughts, but from touching them with awareness. Not from replacing them, but from seeing through them. When you see a thought clearly, it loses its ability to push you around. When you see an emotion clearly, it becomes bearable. And when you see your patterns clearly, you begin to break free. You don't have to believe every thought. You don't have to chase every feeling. You don't have to get caught in every loop. There is a part of you that can simply watch, that can hold space, that can breathe through the moment and let the wave pass. That part of you gets stronger with every sit, with every moment of awareness, with every time you choose to stay with what is instead of being pulled into what might be. Vipassana is not about stopping your thoughts. It's about seeing their nature, recognizing their impermanence, watching them rise and fall like everything else. You stop fearing your mind because you've learned to observe it. You stop needing to escape because you've learned how to stay. And this practice transforms your life off the cushion too. In conversations, you catch the reactive thought before it becomes a harsh word. In stress, you feel the first signs before the spiral begins. In uncertainty, you notice the urge to control before it tightens. You become more responsive, less reactive, more centered, less scattered. Not because life is easier, but because your mind is clearer. And clarity is power. Not the loud, dominating kind, but the kind that sees through confusion, that holds presence in difficulty, that makes space in the middle of chaos. This clarity doesn't shout, it watches. And in that watching, you discover a strength you never knew you had. You can't stop thoughts from arising, but you can stop dancing with every one. You can learn to pause, to see, to choose. Vipassana trains you to meet the mind like a wise friend, curious, calm, honest. It shows you that you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that sees them, and from that awareness, everything changes. Let's keep going. When you learn to watch your thoughts without getting caught in them, something begins to shift beneath the surface. You see how much of your stress was never about the world, but about your attachment to the stories in your head. You feel the space that opens when you no longer chase every impulse or defend every opinion. That space, that silence, that clarity, it introduces a deeper question. If most of what you believed, thought, and feared was just passing noise, What else are you holding on to that you don't actually need? We've been told that fulfillment comes from having more status, more possessions, more experiences. But deep down, you know that every time you get what you wanted, the satisfaction fades, the thrill wears off, the goalposts move, and the chase begins again. That's not happiness. That's hunger disguised as progress. Buddhism offers a radically different path, one that doesn't tell you to add more to your life, but to subtract what's unnecessary, not to deprive you, but to free you. Renunciation isn't about suffering. It's not about punishing yourself or rejecting the world. It's about letting go of what weighs you down. It's the quiet joy that arises when you stop needing so much. When you step off the treadmill of craving and rediscover peace in simplicity. True renunciation feels less like loss and more like relief. This practice begins by noticing how much energy goes into wanting. The mind is constantly reaching, grabbing, comparing. It says, if I just had this, if I could fix that, if I become like them, then I'd be okay. But that future never arrives. It's always just out of reach. Renunciation doesn't destroy desire. It removes the illusion that fulfilling desire will bring lasting peace. You begin to see that craving is a kind of tension. It creates a sense of lack, a restlessness, a pressure to change your moment before it's even been lived. Letting go of craving doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming full, so full of presence that you no longer need something extra to feel alive. This starts with small things. You choose not to reach for the phone just because you're bored. You pause before buying something just to feel better. You breathe instead of reacting to the need for constant stimulation. These moments seem tiny, but each one is a thread. And when you start pulling those threads, the whole fabric of compulsion starts to loosen. Renunciation also means letting go of roles and identities that no longer serve you. Maybe you've carried the pressure to be the strong one, the smart one, the successful one. Renunciation allows you to lay those down, not because they're wrong, but because they're heavy. You don't need to keep performing. You don't need to keep earning your worth. Your value doesn't increase with effort or applause. There's a joy that comes when you stop proving and just start being. A joy that isn't loud or flashy. It's steady, quiet, grounded. It doesn't need recognition because it's not seeking anything. It's complete in itself. This practice also challenges the belief that ownership equals freedom. In reality, everything you own owns a piece of you. Every object requires care, maintenance, attention. The more you accumulate, the more you're tied to things that don't truly nourish you. Renunciation invites you to question, what am I actually using? What brings clarity and peace, and what just creates clutter? Letting go of material excess creates room not just in your home, but in your mind. You begin to feel the lightness of spaciousness, not empty space as absence, but as freedom. Room to breathe, room to move, room to think clearly. Simplicity becomes not a sacrifice, but a strategy, a way to return to what really matters. Even in relationships, renunciation shows up. It teaches you to let go of control, of expectations, of the urge to possess. You stop needing others to behave a certain way for you to be okay. You start offering love freely without needing it to look or feel a certain way in return. That's not detachment. That's unconditional presence. When you stop clinging, connection deepens. You may find that letting go doesn't mean having less life. It means having less noise around life. The meals you eat become more flavorful when you're not rushing. The conversations become richer when you're not checking your phone. The time you spend alone becomes nourishing instead of lonely. Why? Because you're finally with yourself instead of trying to escape yourself. Renunciation also transforms how you relate to time. When you're always trying to get somewhere, time feels scarce. You're behind, late, pushed. But when you stop chasing, time opens up. The moment expands. You feel less like a prisoner of the clock and more like a participant in something timeless. You stop running. You start arriving. This way of being is rare in the modern world. Society rewards the hustle. It celebrates more speed, more noise, more achievement. But that path is often full of silent suffering, burnout, emptiness, disconnection. Renunciation offers something different, contentment. Not the kind you fake, the kind you feel when you've stopped needing life to be different in order to be okay. There's a deep intelligence in letting go, because the mind that can let go is the mind that can rest. It no longer fears missing out because it has nothing to prove. It no longer fears silence because it no longer fears itself. And that kind of mind is powerful, not because it dominates, but because it's free. This isn't about minimalism as a trend. It's about inner stillness as a way of living. You can still enjoy beautiful things, still create, still contribute, but you do it from fullness, not from lack. You do it because it expresses who you are, not because you're trying to become someone better. Renunciation also teaches you to let go of outcomes. You act without attachment to the result. You do what's right, what's kind, what's needed, but without clinging to how it turns out. That's freedom. You become less reactive, more rooted. You find peace not in what happens, but in how you meet what happens. And that peace is contagious. When you no longer need so much, you start giving more. Not because you have to, but because you can. You give your time, your presence, your care, without keeping score. You become a source of calm in a chaotic world. Your stillness gives others permission to slow down. Your simplicity becomes a mirror that helps others question their own noise. This is how renunciation becomes joy. It's not about less life. It's about less illusion, less tension, less chasing. And in that absence, something beautiful emerges. A deeper presence, a clearer view, a fuller heart, and the surprising discovery that peace was never hidden. It was just buried under too much. Letting go in this way becomes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself, for others, for the world. Because when you stop needing so much, you start noticing so much more. You notice the softness of the breeze, the warmth in someone's voice, the rhythm of your own breath. These things were always there. You just needed space to feel them. And as you continue to let go, you may find that what you truly longed for was never a thing, never a title, never an outcome. It was this stillness, this simplicity, this moment, fully met, fully lived, fully enough. The moment you let go of chasing, something profound begins to happen. Your nervous system exhales. There's no longer a demand to have, to impress, to possess. You become aware of how much energy you were wasting on things that never truly satisfied. But even as the surface calms, something stirs underneath. A flicker, a tug, a movement in the mind that says, just one more. It doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It whispers. Desire rarely enters the room like a scream. It's subtle. It slips in the back door, disguised as restlessness, boredom, impulse, or curiosity. By the time most people notice it, it's already in control. A snack grabbed without hunger, a message sent in a moment of loneliness, a purchase made in the middle of numbness. It feels like it happened on its own, But it didn't. There was a seed, a small internal movement that went unnoticed. Buddhism invites us to pay attention at that exact level, before it grows into something that takes us over. This is the practice of tracking craving, not just resisting it, but recognizing it early, before it becomes overwhelming, before it tricks you into acting. It starts by tuning into your body, because desire shows up as a sensation before it becomes a thought. It might feel like tightening in the chest, tingling in the fingers, pressure in the gut. The mind quickly weaves a story around it. I want that. I need this. Just one more time. But the body always speaks first. To work with desire, you don't need to suppress it or shame it. You need to meet it with awareness. You sit with the feeling, the movement, the impulse. You breathe into it instead of reacting from it. And you observe what it really is. Energy, temporary, unstable, not a command, but a current. And when you stay with it, something incredible happens. It peaks, and then it fades, just like a wave. This practice is subtle. It requires sensitivity. You're not waiting for a craving to explode. You're training yourself to feel the whisper before the shout, to sense the contraction before the action. The key is mindfulness, a mind that sees what's happening as it's happening, not hours later when regret shows up, not in the middle of distraction, but right now. One way to develop this sensitivity is to create short pauses throughout your day. You don't need a cushion or a temple, just small moments of stillness. Before opening your phone, before speaking, before eating, you stop, you feel, you check in. What's moving in the body? What's stirring in the mind? Is there a grasping, a pulling, a leaning toward something? This isn't about controlling your behavior. It's about understanding what drives it. When you pause before responding to desire, you get to study the mechanics. You see how craving tries to convince you that satisfaction is one step away. You hear the inner voice that says, "This will make me feel better." You see the cycle more clearly, the promise, the indulgence, the crash. And with enough observation, the illusion breaks. Craving often pretends to be urgent. It demands attention like a fire alarm. But when you actually turn toward it, you realize there's no emergency. The feeling is uncomfortable, yes, but not unbearable. It's just energy passing through the system. You don't need to fix it. You just need to feel it. Over time, this changes your whole relationship with wanting. You begin to notice that many of your desires weren't yours to begin with. They were conditioned, advertised, inherited, trained into you through repetition. You wanted what others wanted. You reached for what the culture praised. You chased what you were told mattered. But underneath that noise, there's a quieter voice, the voice of your own direct experience. And that voice doesn't need more. It needs truth. Tracking desire also reveals how much of it is a cover for discomfort. You're not craving the snack. You're avoiding a feeling. You're not craving the scroll. You're trying not to feel lonely. You're not craving success. You're afraid of being unworthy. When you meet craving with curiosity, you start to uncover the emotional core underneath it. And that's where real transformation begins. This isn't a one-time insight. It's a practice. And the more you sit with desire without reacting to it, the more freedom you gain. Not because desire disappears, but because you're no longer its puppet. You have space. You have choice. You have the strength to sit in the fire of craving and say, "I see you, and I'm not fooled." And in this space, something unexpected arises. Peace. Not the peace of indulgence, but the peace of integrity. The feeling of being rooted in presence instead of pulled by compulsion. It's quieter, but it lasts longer. It leaves no residue, no guilt, no craving for more. There's a reason the Buddha placed so much emphasis on craving in his teachings. He called it the cause of suffering, not because pleasure is bad, but because blind grasping never ends. The more you feed it, the more it grows. The more you chase, the more you lose yourself. The goal isn't to hate pleasure, it's to see clearly how desire moves and to choose wisely when and how you follow it. This discernment is freedom, and it becomes even more powerful when you notice how desire changes in the body when it's not fed. The heat cools, the tightness softens, the mind settles. You realize that you don't need to satisfy every urge. You don't need to obey every mental impulse. You're stronger than that, and more whole than you thought. There are also moments when desire isn't so subtle. It crashes in like a wave and demands satisfaction. Even then, mindfulness helps. You don't need to pretend it's not there. You don't need to repress it. You just need to hold it with awareness. Feel the heat. Notice the stories. Stay connected to the breath. Let the wave rise and let it pass. Sometimes you'll still give in. That's okay. The goal is not perfection. It's understanding. Every time you watch the cycle, you learn. You see how craving promises peace but delivers agitation. You see how quick the pleasure fades and how quickly another craving replaces it. This seeing is not judgment, it's wisdom. It grows slowly, but it lasts. And this wisdom changes your values. You stop looking for satisfaction in places that never provided it. You stop needing more. You start appreciating what's already here. Simplicity becomes sweeter. Stillness becomes nourishing. You find joy not in chasing, but in being. And you may notice that desire doesn't vanish. It evolves. It becomes quieter, more refined, less aggressive. You still want things, but the wanting doesn't grip you. It flows through you like wind through trees. There's space, there's ease. You can feel the longing and still stay grounded. This level of awareness ripples out into every area of life. You stop consuming unconsciously. You stop reacting impulsively. You stop needing others to meet your emotional needs right now. You start responding with clarity, with patience, with power. You also begin to notice the subtle difference between a true calling and a craving. A craving pulls at you, fast, loud, needy. A calling moves through you, quiet, steady, grounded. One drains you, the other fills you. Mindfulness teaches you to feel the difference in your body, to sense the energy behind the desire, and to choose the path that leads to deeper peace. This practice also strengthens your resilience, because every time you sit with desire and don't act on it, you build inner strength. You realize that discomfort isn't dangerous, that you don't need to run, that you can hold tension without collapsing. This is real confidence, not the confidence that comes from getting what you want, but the confidence that comes from knowing you don't need to. And from that place, you begin to trust yourself in a new way. You know that when craving arises, you have tools, you have space, you have awareness. You don't need to fear your impulses. You can meet them, feel them, and choose from presence. That's what makes desire no longer dangerous. It becomes information, a signal to look deeper, a doorway to self-knowledge, and sometimes, yes, a guide towards something important. But you're no longer following it blindly. You're walking with it, not being dragged by it. And the more you do this, the more you realize that what you were really craving all along wasn't the thing. It was the feeling, the peace, the relief, the connection. And those feelings are already available, right here, right now, in the breath, in the body, in the stillness of a mind that no longer chases itself in circles. This is how desire softens, not by force, but by clarity. not by suppression, but by awareness, not by rejecting the world, but by learning to meet it without losing yourself. You don't become cold or distant, you become centered, whole, awake. And from that center, the world doesn't look so tempting. It looks alive, beautiful, enough. Because when you can feel a desire rise and not need to act on it, you finally know what freedom feels like. Once you see desire for what it really is, not a command, but a wave, you stop being dragged. You stop reacting automatically. You start pausing, watching, choosing. And with that awareness comes something even deeper, the realization that your entire inner life is a chain of linked events, not isolated moments. Thoughts don't just appear. Reactions don't come from nowhere. Every emotion, every impulse, every habit, each one arises because of what came before. It's all connected. And if that's true, then freedom doesn't come from control. It comes from understanding the loop itself. This loop is what the Buddha called paticcasamuppada, or dependent origination. It's one of the most profound insights in all of Buddhism, and also one of the most overlooked. At first glance, it seems complicated, but at its heart, it's simple. Nothing happens independently. Everything arises because conditions support it. And if you change the conditions, the outcome changes. This is not philosophy. It's a map, a guide for how to stop spinning in circles. At the core of the loop is ignorance, not a lack of intelligence, but a lack of clarity, not seeing things as they are. From that foggy state, contact leads to feeling, feeling leads to craving, craving leads to clinging, clinging leads to becoming, and becoming leads to suffering. It's a chain reaction, like dominoes falling. But here's the most important part. Any link in the chain can be examined. Any one of them can be interrupted. This changes everything, because it means your reactions aren't random. They're patterned, predictable. They unfold in a sequence. And the more you understand that sequence, the more you can choose differently, not from willpower, but from wisdom. Start with a simple example. You're walking through your day. You hear someone's comment. That's sense contact. The sound hits your ears. Instantly, a feeling arises. Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. That's Vedana. You don't choose the feeling, it just comes. But this is where the fork in the road appears. If the feeling is unpleasant, the mind often reacts with craving. I want this to stop. If it's pleasant, it craves continuation. I want more of this. And if you're not aware in that moment, craving becomes clinging, grabbing tightly onto the idea that this feeling defines you or that you must act on it. Clinging leads to becoming, a reinforced sense of identity. I'm the kind of person who gets offended easily. I'm the type who can't let things go, and from there, the cycle keeps turning. That moment becomes part of your narrative, shaping your next thought, your next mood, your next decision. This is samsara, not a place, but a pattern, a loop you didn't even realize you were stuck in. The brilliance of dependent origination is that it doesn't just describe suffering, it shows how suffering is built. And if something can be built, it can also be unbuilt. You don't need to break the whole chain at once, you just need to notice where you're feeding it. That's where mindfulness comes in. You begin by observing contact and feeling without rushing into craving. You slow down the reflex, you watch the process, you name it silently. Contact, feeling, craving forming. And in that pause, you create space, enough space to choose a different response. You might notice that craving doesn't always lead to clinging when it's seen clearly. If you can feel desire without acting on it, without feeding it with stories, it loses power. The same is true for aversion. If you can stay with discomfort without immediately pushing it away, it passes. The loop needs your participation. Without your reaction, it begins to dissolve. And this insight applies to everything: relationships, habits, emotions, the way you react to criticism, the way you respond to praise, the way you chase comfort or avoid pain. It all happens through conditioned patterns, and those patterns can be examined, softened, and restructured. Even deeply rooted suffering follows this logic. Trauma, anxiety, shame. These aren't random conditions. They arise through causes, and while you can't always control the original cause, you can begin to change your relationship to what follows. You can interrupt the secondary suffering, the resistance, the judgment, the looping thoughts, and over time, the entire system shifts. This isn't about blame, it's about agency. Understanding dependent origination gives you the power to step out of victimhood, not by denying pain, but by recognizing that pain doesn't have to dominate your path. You can meet it with awareness, you can see the process, and you can respond instead of react. The key here is clarity. When the Buddha spoke of ignorance, he didn't mean stupidity. He meant the basic human habit of not seeing clearly, of reacting on autopilot, of assuming our thoughts and emotions are the whole truth. But with mindfulness, the fog begins to lift. You start recognizing that just because something feels urgent doesn't mean it's true. Just because something is habitual doesn't mean it's helpful. Over time, this understanding becomes embodied. You no longer need to recite the 12 links like a list. You begin to feel them. You see the contact before the reaction. You feel the craving start to form. And you know, right then, that you have a choice, a breath, a pause, a different direction. This is how karma works too. Not as punishment or reward from the universe, but as conditioning. You plant a mental seed, and over time, it becomes a habit. That habit shapes your perception. Your perception shapes your choices. Your choices shape your future. It's all connected, and every moment of mindfulness is a moment of planting a new seed. You can begin to recondition your system toward presence instead of craving, toward curiosity instead of judgment, toward openness instead of resistance. This isn't abstract, it's practice. One reaction at a time, one pause, one breath, and it doesn't need to be perfect. Each time you catch the loop in motion, even for a second, that's freedom. What makes this teaching so revolutionary is that it puts the power back in your hands, not through force, but through awareness. You don't have to be trapped in old patterns. You don't have to keep becoming the version of yourself that suffering built. You can unhook, you can see, you can choose again. And this choice isn't about becoming someone else. It's about returning to what you already are underneath the layers, spacious, awake, responsive, not perfect, but present, not passive, but clear. This teaching also invites deep compassion, because when you understand that everyone is acting out their own loops, you stop taking things so personally. That rude comment? Conditioned. That closed heart? Conditioned. That impatient reaction? Also conditioned. This doesn't excuse behavior, but it explains it. And that explanation softens judgment. You begin to see the world differently, less through blame, more through cause and effect, less through control, more through understanding. You stop needing to fix everyone because you know real change starts at the root, by seeing clearly how things arise. Even your own resistance to this practice follows the same loop. The urge to quit, to distract, to seek comfort, that too comes from causes. And when you watch it arise with care, you can respond with wisdom, with patience, with trust. This is what the Buddha meant by liberation, not escape from the world, but freedom within it. Freedom from compulsive reactivity, from clinging to what hurts, from chasing what never satisfies. And that freedom begins not in some distant future, but in this breath, this pause, this choice to look, to see, and to stop feeding the loop. You don't need to memorize the whole chain to benefit from it. Start where you are. Notice how craving forms, how thoughts attach, how identity gets reinforced, and gently interrupt the cycle, again and again, not with force, but with presence. And over time, something extraordinary happens. The loop weakens, the mind quiets, the heart opens, and what remains is clarity. Not the kind that knows everything, but the kind that sees enough to not get pulled into every storm. This is the path of awareness. Not a straight line, but a spiraling inward, a deepening recognition that your suffering is not a life sentence. It's a process, and processes can be transformed. The moment you begin to recognize the patterns that shape your suffering, you also begin to feel the weight of something deeper, something harder to name. Even with all the awareness, even with all the clarity, there is a shadow always nearby. Not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, persistent one. The knowledge, tucked just beneath every moment, that all of this will end, that nothing lasts, that you too are temporary. Most people look away from that truth. Buddhism teaches us to look straight into it and through it. Because what if the fear of death is the root of every fear? What if the clinging, the chasing, the defending of self, all of it, is just resistance to what's unavoidable? And what if the most profound peace doesn't come from avoiding death, but from learning how to die before you die? This is not a morbid thought. It's a doorway, one that has been walked through by countless monks, sages, and practitioners across centuries. Tibetan Buddhism in particular developed the practice of phowa, the conscious rehearsal of death, not to escape life, but to understand it fully. In this practice, you visualize the dissolution of your body, your attachments, your identity, and learn how to let go with grace, clarity, and love. The purpose is not to simulate a fantasy, it's to train the mind to release its grip, to meet the end with the same awareness you bring to a breath, to see that death isn't an interruption of life, it's a part of it, an essential rhythm, a teacher. We tend to live as if death is a distant event, always scheduled later. But the truth is, we die in small ways every day. The end of a breath, the passing of a moment, the fading of an emotion. Every experience arises and fades. That's not poetry. It's the structure of reality. Nothing holds. Nothing stays. What you were yesterday is already gone. What you'll be tomorrow hasn't arrived. There's only this. Contemplating death sharpens this truth. It cuts through distraction. It removes the illusion that you have endless time. Suddenly, what matters becomes clear. The grudge doesn't matter. The argument loses heat. The ego's concerns seem smaller. Why? Because death dissolves everything false, and in its light, what remains is what's real. This reflection doesn't produce despair. It produces depth. Because when you stop pretending you'll live forever, you start showing up differently. Your attention sharpens. Your heart softens. Your words carry more weight. You stop postponing presence. You become more generous with your love, less careless with your time. And this isn't just about the final breath. It's about training now. Every time you release something you were clinging to, control, identity, expectation, you are rehearsing for death. Every time you surrender to the moment instead of resisting it, you are practicing liberation. Dying while alive doesn't mean losing your vitality. It means losing the illusion that anything can be held forever. Phowa teaches you to work with this truth actively. In the traditional practice, you visualize the dissolution of the body into elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space. Not as metaphors, but as an actual process. The body releases its structure, the breath fades, the sense of self becomes transparent, and at the center of all this, awareness remains. That's the key realization. What dies is form. What dissolves is identity. But awareness, in its purest form, is not bound by shape. When you learn to identify with that awareness, instead of with the changing layers of self, death loses its sting. You're not losing anything. You're returning to what has always been free. This insight doesn't require belief. It requires observation. When you sit quietly, you can already feel how the mind wants to hold on to things. Thoughts, roles, memories. But each of those passes, and something remains to witness the passing. That's the space Phowa points to, the unmoving presence behind all change. Dying while still alive means shifting your center of gravity. Instead of building your life around what can be lost, you begin to live from what cannot be taken, not as theory, but as felt truth. You release what you thought you needed and find peace in the releasing itself. There is a deep relief in this, because so much of suffering comes from holding on. You want things to stay. You want people to stay. You want the good moments to never end. But when you see the nature of things clearly, you stop trying to freeze the flow of life. You begin to flow with it. And that's not resignation, it's wisdom. It's trust in the impermanence that holds all beauty. Buddhist monks meditate in cemeteries for this reason. Not to be dark, but to be awake. To sit with bones, ashes, the remnants of form, and to see their own reflection. To remember that nothing is promised. And in that memory, to love more deeply, to live more presently, to let go more willingly. This practice also prepares you for the actual moment of death. Most people meet it with panic because they haven't practiced, they haven't rehearsed. But those who've trained in letting go, who've watched their attachments dissolve again and again, meet it with grace, not because they're fearless, but because they're familiar with the territory. And this doesn't only help the dying, it helps the living. You start to relate differently to everything. You cherish more, but cling less. You say what needs to be said. You forgive faster. You don't waste time trying to be right. You use your days like they matter, because they do. Not in a pressured way, but in a spacious, reverent way. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You make the moment you're in count. And when grief arises, when you lose someone or something dear, this practice gives you something stable to return to. Not denial, not numbness, but a deeper knowing. You can grieve without collapsing. You can feel the loss fully and still stay grounded. Because you've practiced letting go. You've trained in the sacred art of releasing. This makes you strong, not in a hardened way, but in the most tender way. Because you are no longer afraid of what will end. You meet each moment with an open palm, not a closed fist. You receive it fully. And when it passes, you bow. You don't demand more time. You give thanks for what was. This is liberation, not from life, but from the fear of its impermanence. It doesn't make life smaller. It makes it luminous. Because when you live like you're dying, you begin to touch everything more gently. You speak with more care. You suffer less over small things. You smile more, because you know how little time we really have. And yet, you don't rush. You don't panic. You slow down. You breathe deeper. You savor. That's the paradox. Knowing death is close doesn't make you frantic. It makes you still. Because you realize this moment, just as it is, holds everything you were ever looking for. Not the next one. Not the better one. This one. Dying while still alive means you no longer wait to be whole. You stop postponing freedom. You stop needing proof. You let yourself drop into the present without needing to fix anything. You allow your old self to fall away, and you stop reaching to catch it. And even the fear of death softens. Because what you feared was not death itself, but the loss of control, the unknown, the end of self. But when you've already let go of the illusion of self, what's left to fear? When you've already seen through the clinging, what's left to lose? This doesn't make you indifferent. It makes you deeply, beautifully awake to your life, to others, to the miracle of breath. You stop walking through life half asleep. You wake up, and in that wakefulness, you live with less resistance and more reverence. The practice of dying before death is not separate from daily life. It is daily life, fully lived. It is the conversation you don't avoid, the emotion you allow yourself to feel, the apology you no longer postpone. It is the constant reminder that you are not here forever, and that far from being a tragedy is what makes everything precious. So you walk through life not trying to preserve it, but to participate in it, not trying to grip it tightly, but to move with it lightly. And one day, when the real ending comes, it won't feel like a stranger. It will feel like something you've already met, and met with love. Letting go of the illusion of permanence softens everything. The more you accept that even your own identity dissolves, the easier it becomes to meet life as it is, not as you wish it to be. But there's still one layer that tends to slip through unnoticed: your moods. Not quite thoughts, not quite behaviors. Moods drift through your inner world and color everything you experience. The problem is not that they come. The problem is that you believe them. Mood is not truth. Mood is weather. Some days it's clear, other days it's cloudy. Sometimes it's warm, sometimes cold, sometimes heavy, sometimes restless. But none of it defines the sky. The sky remains. And you are not your moods. You are the awareness that observes them. Buddhism teaches this with clarity and precision. You don't have to fight the emotional storm. You just need to remember that it's not permanent, it's not personal, and it's not you. When you're caught in a mood, the mind doesn't say, "I'm having a temporary emotional pattern." It says, "This is how things are." Sadness becomes a story, anger becomes identity, anxiety becomes a forecast. You forget that these are just movements in the mind, not reality itself. They pass through, but if you don't see them clearly, you start living your entire life based on what's essentially just weather. The core practice here is observation without judgment. In Buddhist meditation, this is supported by mental noting. When a mood arises, instead of diving into it or pushing it away, you simply name it. Sadness is here. Frustration is here. Restlessness is here. That naming is subtle but powerful. It creates space. It helps you stop identifying with what's passing through. You shift from "I am sad" to "sadness is being experienced." From "I am anxious" to "anxiety is present." That small shift gives you breathing room. Mental noting doesn't solve the mood. It reveals the mood. It shows you how your inner weather works. And when you start seeing it clearly, you stop taking it so personally. The sadness is not your fault. The irritation is not your failure. It's a movement caused by conditions: sleep, hormones, memories, interactions, unseen triggers. And like all conditions, it will change. This understanding helps when you're caught in emotional loops. Instead of trying to think your way out, you let the mood move through. You stay with it like you would stay with a storm. Inside, safe, watching the windows, not blaming the sky for changing. You don't have to fix it. You just have to stay grounded. The danger comes when you mistake mood for truth. When sadness tells you that you're failing. When anxiety whispers that something is about to go wrong. When anger claims that someone deserves your judgment. None of those things are facts. They're interpretations through a tinted lens. Acting on those interpretations without seeing the lens itself leads to suffering. The antidote is steadiness, not suppression, but steadiness. You build it by returning to the body. When a mood rises, where do you feel it? Is there tightness in the chest, pressure in the head, heat in the stomach? These sensations are your anchor. By turning attention toward them, you shift awareness out of the mental storyline and into direct experience. This grounds you. Staying with the sensation teaches you that emotions are physical events. They rise, peak, and fall. No mood lasts forever. Even the ones that feel overwhelming pass when they're not fed by resistance or identification. The practice is patience. Breath by breath, you ride it out. Buddhist teachings emphasize equanimity for this reason. Equanimity isn't detachment, it's balance. The ability to stay upright when the mood sways left or right, to feel it all without being swallowed. You're not numb, you're present. And because you're not chasing pleasant feelings or fleeing unpleasant ones, you begin to trust yourself more. This trust changes everything. You stop being afraid of your inner life. You stop fearing sadness because you've learned it won't break you. You stop running from anger because you've learned to hold it without acting it out. You stop clinging to joy because you know you don't need to freeze it in place for it to be beautiful. Each mood becomes a visitor, not an invader, and your job isn't to entertain it or kick it out, but to greet it with awareness. Ah, you're here again. Okay, let's sit together. That attitude softens the inner conflict. It brings compassion into your own process. Sometimes the mood stays longer than expected. That's okay too. Some storms linger. But even then, you're practicing. You're staying aware. You're building a kind of internal home that doesn't collapse every time the weather changes. And that stability is what allows you to move through the world without reacting to everything that passes through your mind. This practice doesn't make you emotionally flat. It makes you emotionally free. You still feel joy, grief, excitement, disappointment, but you're not ruled by them. You can choose how to respond instead of being swept into automatic patterns. You also start seeing that moods are often inherited. Sometimes what you feel isn't even yours. It's absorbed through family, culture, environment. You carry emotional atmospheres without realizing it. A parent's anxiety, a partner's anger, a cultural sense of urgency or worthlessness. When you observe mood as weather, you begin to separate what's truly yours from what you've been conditioned to carry. And you notice how quickly moods try to create stories. The mind wants to explain the feeling. I feel off. It must be because I'm failing. I'm tired. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. These stories are guesses, not truths. You don't have to follow them. You can sit with the feeling and let it unfold without adding a narrative. Sometimes the mood teaches you something important. Sometimes it just passes. The key is not to jump to conclusions too quickly. Just because you're feeling low doesn't mean your life is falling apart. Just because you're energized doesn't mean you've finally figured it all out. Let the moods move. Let the weather change. You're learning how to navigate, not to control. This approach also helps you relate better to others. You stop expecting them to be consistent all the time. You stop making their moods mean something about you. When someone is withdrawn, you see it as their storm, not your failure. When someone is reactive, you pause instead of escalating, because you know how your own moods rise and fall. That understanding becomes compassion. And in this shared humanity, you also see that everyone is doing their best under the conditions they're in. That's not an excuse for harmful behavior, but it is a reminder that we're all swimming through the same unpredictable emotional waters. Eventually, your relationship with mood becomes more fluid. You're less reactive, less shocked when sadness appears, less addicted to chasing joy. You begin to develop an inner rhythm that's not based on outer emotional swings. You rest in something deeper than mood, something steadier, something more trustworthy. This is what mindfulness truly offers, not the elimination of feeling, but the freedom to feel without becoming lost. You can live a full emotional life and still be grounded. You can cry without collapsing, laugh without clinging, rage without harm, sit in sorrow without shame. And that freedom becomes your new baseline, not a mood, not a passing high, but a quiet, stable awareness beneath it all, the sky behind the weather, the presence that remains no matter what storm is passing through. Once you begin to see moods as weather, temporary, shifting, and impersonal, you stop treating your emotions like life sentences. You hold them with awareness, not attachment. But even when you know they're passing, you might still feel caught in the push and pull of your body's reactions. Some days, everything feels loud and fast. Other days, it's heavy and slow. Even with mindfulness, your energy fluctuates in ways that are hard to explain. That's because emotions are only one piece of your internal experience. Beneath the stories, beneath the mood, lives the nervous system. And when you learn how to listen to its signals, you unlock another layer of freedom. Buddhism speaks often about the middle way, a path between extremes. Not indulgence, not denial, not escape, not obsession, just balance. What's often missed is that this principle doesn't apply only to how you live or think. It applies to your biology. Your body also walks a tightrope every day between too much and too little. Too much activation leads to restlessness, irritability, anxiety. Too little leads to numbness, exhaustion, withdrawal. The nervous system is always trying to find the middle, but most people don't know how to help it. This is where modern science meets ancient wisdom. The polyvagal theory, introduced by Dr. Stephen Porges, gives language to what Buddhists have felt for centuries in meditation. That your body has multiple states of regulation. You're not just calm or stressed. You exist on a spectrum of physiological states, mobilized, frozen, settled, and each state shapes how you see the world, how you speak, how you breathe, and how you feel. When your nervous system is too activated, everything feels urgent. Your thoughts race, your chest tightens, your breath shortens. It's easy to mistake this for alertness or ambition, but it's survival energy. You're not present, you're bracing. Even positive excitement can tip into dysregulation when it becomes too much for your system to hold. At the other end of the spectrum is shutdown. The nervous system collapses into low energy, dissociation, and emotional numbness. You're not fighting, you're disconnected. It's not depression in the clinical sense, but it mimics it. You lose motivation. Conversations feel draining. The world flattens. Nothing feels safe, but nothing feels reachable either. Between those extremes is something rare: regulation. A state where your body feels safe, your breath moves freely, and your awareness is both clear and calm. This is the physiological middle way. And just like in Buddhist practice, it requires attention, intention, and compassion to find. The first step is to notice. How does your body speak when it's too activated? Do you clench your fists, raise your shoulders, interrupt people, struggle to finish a sentence before starting another? These aren't flaws, they're signals, clues that your system is running hot. When you bring awareness to them, you interrupt the unconscious momentum. Likewise, learn to recognize the signs of collapse. When do you check out of conversations? When do your eyes glaze over, even when you're listening? When do you feel the urge to isolate, not because you enjoy solitude, but because you feel incapable of connection? These are red flags, not to judge, but to respond to gently. The middle way begins with regulating breath, not forcing it, but noticing its rhythm. A dysregulated system either holds the breath or speeds it up. But when you return to a soft, steady inhale and exhale, you signal safety to the brain. This is not a hack, it's a language. The breath tells the body, "We're okay now," and the body listens. This regulation isn't only individual, it's relational. The nervous system co-regulates. This means your state is affected by others. When someone speaks gently, moves slowly, and maintains presence, your body responds. You feel steadier, even if you don't know why. And the reverse is also true. When others are reactive, rushed, or defensive, your system might mirror that without realizing it. This is why meditation is so effective, not just because it calms the mind, but because it gives your nervous system a break from reacting to social cues. Silence becomes safety. Stillness becomes reset. In the absence of chaos, your system begins to relearn what calm actually feels like, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. Regulating your nervous system also means adjusting stimulation. Some people feel overwhelmed by noise, light, or crowds. Others understimulate themselves and slip into apathy. The middle way invites you to find your right level, not the one you think you should tolerate, but the one that supports your clarity. It's not weakness to limit input, it's wisdom. This balance also applies to effort. In meditation, too much striving agitates the system. Too little leads to drifting or sleep. The sweet spot is relaxed effort, being engaged without being tense, alert without being rigid. This is true off the cushion too. Your daily rhythm should include periods of activation and periods of rest. Push too long and you burn out. Rest too long and you lose direction. Find your rhythm. One of the biggest obstacles to regulation is judgment. When you feel off, the mind tends to shame you. Why am I like this? Why can't I stay calm? That self-criticism is itself dysregulating. The solution is not perfection, it's kindness. When your system is overloaded or shut down, the most powerful response is not control, it's care. Place a hand on your chest. Speak to yourself as you would a child. Breathe. Wait. This tenderness restores more than any technique. The middle way also includes social boundaries. Not every environment supports regulation. Some people are chronically dysregulated and don't know it. You don't need to fix them, but you do need to protect your peace. This might mean limiting contact, reducing noise, or simply taking space. You're not abandoning anyone. You're honoring the balance that lets you show up fully. Nutrition, sleep, movement, they matter too. A tired, undernourished body is more reactive. It's not just emotional, it's biological. Buddhist monks have long emphasized simplicity in food and routine, not as asceticism, but as nervous system care. Predictability reduces threat. Simplicity supports clarity. When you start living this way, you begin to feel your life differently. You catch overstimulation before it turns into anxiety. You notice underactivation before it becomes numbness. You start choosing activities, relationships, and environments that support your middle ground. And slowly, your baseline shifts. You no longer see calm as boring. You no longer confuse intensity with aliveness. You start craving peace, not as escape, but as presence. You begin to value steadiness over spikes of emotion, balance over drama, real connection over constant reaction. This has ripple effects. You become someone others feel safe around, not because you're always zen, but because your presence is consistent. You can hold space for others without absorbing their chaos. You can stay grounded even when things get intense. Your nervous system becomes an anchor, not a wave. And this isn't just good for relationships, it's transformative for your spiritual path. Because a dysregulated body can't stay still. It can't observe clearly. It confuses urgency with truth. But a regulated body becomes a stable container for insight. Your meditation deepens. Your compassion grows. Your awareness expands, not through force, but through safety. That's the heart of the middle way. Not just an idea, a felt experience. A body that knows when to move and when to rest. A mind that knows when to engage and when to release. A nervous system that isn't swinging between extremes, but resting in clarity. This isn't about never being triggered. It's about knowing how to return, about shortening the time between imbalance and recovery, about learning the language of your own inner world so fluently that you can tend to it before it shouts. Over time, your relationship to suffering changes. You stop making things worse by reacting. You stop pushing your limits for the sake of performance. You start honoring the signals that used to be ignored. And in doing so, you embody the wisdom that Buddhism has always pointed to. Liberation isn't somewhere else. It's in how you meet what's already here. As your nervous system settles and finds balance, you begin to notice how much clearer life becomes when you're no longer pulled between extremes. You stop confusing stimulation with vitality or stillness with stagnation. Your body becomes more responsive, your choices more intentional, your awareness sharper. But there's another dimension of clarity that remains mostly untouched by even the most disciplined daily practice. The part of your life that unfolds while you sleep. Most people treat sleep as escape. The lights go out, the body collapses, and the mind drifts into chaos. Dreams arrive without permission. They play out strange stories, some thrilling, some terrifying, and most of them forgotten by morning. But what if sleep wasn't downtime? What if dreaming was a path, a continuation of your training, not a break from it? Tibetan Buddhism sees no division between waking and sleeping life. Both are appearances in consciousness. Both are temporary. Both feel real while they happen. And both can be met with awareness. Dream yoga, one of its most advanced practices, shows you how. At its core, dream yoga is not about controlling dreams. It's about becoming conscious inside them. Just like meditation trains you to be aware of thoughts during the day, dream yoga trains you to stay aware in the dream state. The purpose isn't to escape reality, it's to understand the nature of reality more deeply. Because once you wake up inside a dream, you begin to question what's real even while awake. The practice begins with a simple intention, remembering that you're dreaming while you're dreaming. This is called lucid dreaming. It's not a rare skill, it's a trainable one. And it starts with mindfulness during the day. The more clearly you observe waking life, the more likely that awareness will carry over into sleep. During the day, you practice questioning reality, not with paranoia, but with curiosity. Is this a dream? Could I be sleeping right now? That questioning creates a habit. It builds a thread that the dreaming mind can pick up later. And when that happens, when you look at your hands in a dream and realize you're dreaming, everything shifts. In that moment, fear drops. You're no longer at the mercy of the dream. You can explore. You can meditate inside the dream. You can dissolve it completely, not by force, but by attention. And in doing so, you experience something profound. Reality is more flexible than you thought. But dream yoga goes further than lucidity. It's not about entertainment or fantasy. It's about training the mind to recognize illusion in all its forms. In dreams, you experience joy, pain, love, panic, and none of it is real. When you see that clearly, you start to question the solidity of waking experiences too. Not to reject them, but to stop clinging so tightly. You begin to understand that both worlds, dream and waking, are appearances arising in awareness. This recognition softens suffering. In daily life, emotions feel heavy because they seem permanent. Problems feel urgent because they seem absolute. But when you've practiced navigating dream experiences consciously, you learn to meet all experiences with more lightness, even anger, even grief. You've trained in illusion. You've learned how to stay steady in shifting landscapes, and that strength carries over. Dream yoga also prepares you for death. Tibetan teachings say that the moment of dying resembles the dream state. The mind enters a non-physical realm shaped by habits and perceptions. If you've never practiced being conscious in that realm, you may feel overwhelmed. But if you've trained in lucid awareness during sleep, you meet death the same way you meet a dream, with clarity, courage, and presence. This is why dream yoga isn't considered separate from spiritual practice. It's a continuation of it, a mirror to your waking state, a chance to see your mind in a raw, unfiltered way. Because in dreams, your thoughts create reality instantly. You fear something, it appears. You expect something, it manifests. This is a speeded-up version of how your mind creates suffering during the day. By watching it happen in dreams, you understand it better in life. But the practice isn't just internal. Lucid dreaming also gives you direct access to your subconscious patterns. You can ask the dream questions. You can face fears. You can dissolve identities. You can practice letting go. And all of it happens in a realm where nothing is fixed. This kind of inner work is powerful because it bypasses the usual defenses of the waking mind. You're less limited, more open. To prepare for this, there are specific techniques. One is dream recall. Keep a notebook by your bed. As soon as you wake, write down what you remember, even fragments. This trains your mind to pay attention. Over time, recall improves. You start to see recurring themes, symbols, patterns. These aren't random, they're your mind trying to speak. Another method is reality checks. During the day, ask yourself, am I dreaming? Look at your hands. Try pushing your finger through your palm. Look at a word, then look again to see if it's changed. These checks create habits, and eventually you'll do one in a dream and realize it. There's also the wake back to bed method. Wake up after 4 or 5 hours of sleep, stay up briefly, then go back to bed with the intention of becoming lucid. This increases the chance of entering REM sleep with awareness, and once you do, the practice begins. When you're lucid, the goal is not to control the dream, but to stabilize awareness. Rub your hands together, spin, look around with focus. Then ask yourself, what is this? What am I? Where is the self? These questions deepen the dream into insight. They take it from experience to awakening. Even if you never have a fully lucid dream, the training is valuable because it makes you more aware of how dreams influence waking life. A bad dream can affect your mood all day. A good dream can shift your energy. These subtle effects show you that experience itself is fluid, that the line between night and day is thinner than it seems. Eventually, the distinction between dream and waking begins to fade. You realize both are appearances, both are impermanent, both can be met with mindfulness. And that insight transforms how you live. You stop chasing illusions, you stop fearing shadows, you live more gently because you've seen how fragile everything is. And from that gentleness grows wisdom. You don't deny the beauty of life, but you no longer need to hold it tightly. You engage fully, knowing it's fleeting. You love completely, knowing it's impermanent. You let go easily, because you've practiced letting go 1,000 times in your sleep. Dream yoga shows you that awakening isn't a future goal. It's a moment-by-moment practice, one that continues even when the body sleeps, one that reveals again and again that awareness is always available, always stable, always free. When you begin to see that both waking life and dreams are crafted from the same fabric of the mind, something softens. You realize that so much of what feels solid is, in fact, shifting. That insight doesn't make life meaningless, it makes it tender. You care more, not less. You start to meet your experiences with a fuller heart, because now you know how temporary they really are. But what happens when your heart opens and then gets overwhelmed? When caring turns into fatigue? When helping others begins to feel like you're losing yourself? That's where equanimity enters, not as a cold retreat, but as the wisdom that holds compassion without collapse. In Buddhism, this quality is called upekkha, and it's one of the 4 sublime abodes, not because it removes you from suffering, but because it allows you to stay close to suffering without drowning in it. So many people confuse compassion with self-sacrifice. They believe that to care deeply, they must absorb everything. But the truth is, compassion without boundaries becomes exhaustion. The ability to give with presence requires the ability to hold your center. Otherwise, your empathy turns into emotional burnout, and your giving starts to come from depletion instead of abundance. Equanimity is not withdrawal, it's not detachment, it's not tuning out, it's full engagement with a steady heart. It means you can care without gripping, you can help without needing to fix, you can feel pain, yours or someone else's, without losing your balance. This balance begins with understanding what you're responsible for and what you're not. You are responsible for your intentions, your actions, your presence. You are not responsible for the outcome. That clarity can sound simple, but it's deeply transformative. Because most burnout comes from clinging to results, wanting others to heal, change, or respond in a certain way. But healing doesn't always come on your timeline, and people don't always grow how you expect. When you release that expectation, something shifts. You start to offer your presence without agenda. You listen without trying to fix. You help without needing to be the hero. That's not indifference. That's maturity. Equanimity also means being aware of your emotional limits, not because you're weak, but because you're human. When you ignore your own signals, when you keep giving even as you empty out, you disconnect from yourself. That disconnection leads to resentment, irritability, and guilt. True compassion includes you too. It doesn't ask you to give what you don't have. Upekkha reminds you to check in with your own body. When you're helping someone, are you holding your breath? Are your shoulders tight? Is your mind racing to fix things? These are signs that you're tipping out of balance. Equanimity teaches you to pause, to return to the breath, to reconnect to your ground before continuing. This is not selfish, it's sustainable, because the most powerful gift you can offer is your regulated, steady presence. When you are calm, others feel it. When you are centered, you create a space that allows others to settle. You become the eye of the storm, not because you're uninvolved, but because you're grounded. You also learn to recognize emotional hooks. Sometimes people unintentionally pull you into their suffering by needing you to feel it for them. You start to carry emotions that aren't yours. This happens quietly. You walk away from a conversation feeling heavy or drained. That's a sign you weren't practicing equanimity, you were fusing. Upekkha trains you to witness pain without absorbing it, to acknowledge it fully but not wear it. In practice, this looks like staying present with someone's grief but not collapsing into their despair. It means you validate their pain, but you don't lose your clarity. You don't rush to change the subject or fix the discomfort. You hold space. You breathe with them. You offer your groundedness as support. And that groundedness is powerful because it doesn't try to control or rescue. It trusts that people are capable of finding their own way. It supports without taking over. It loves without clinging. And that love is stronger than any strategy. Equanimity also protects your compassion from being manipulated. There will be times when people try to pull from you in unhealthy ways, through guilt, expectation, or emotional pressure. When you're centered in upekkha, you see clearly what belongs to you and what doesn't. You can say no without guilt. You can set boundaries without shutting down. That's because equanimity comes from inner stability, not outer conditions. It's not about waiting for everything to be peaceful before you feel calm. It's about training yourself to return to peace even in chaos. Not by numbing, but by remembering. Remembering that all experiences, pain, joy, praise, blame, are passing waves. None of them define you, and none of them can shake your core unless you let them. This kind of stability takes practice. You don't develop it by thinking, you develop it by staying present in uncomfortable moments without running, by staying with your own heart when it wants to shut down, by returning again and again to the breath, to the body, to awareness. And over time, that return becomes easier. You start to feel the difference between reactive helping and conscious care, between anxious fixing and quiet support, between compulsive giving and wise offering. Upekkha also applies to how you deal with conflict. It allows you to hear criticism without collapsing, to receive praise without inflation, to hold others' projections without taking them personally. You become less reactive, not because you've stopped feeling, but because you're anchored in a deeper knowing. That knowing says, "This is not mine to carry," or "I can be here without losing myself," or "They are suffering, and I can offer presence, not rescue." These are not excuses. They are expressions of wisdom, the kind of wisdom that helps you last, that keeps your heart open without bleeding out. And it's not just about others. Equanimity helps you relate to your own suffering without judgment. When you're in pain, it's easy to collapse into self-pity or try to escape. But Upekkha says, this too is passing, not in a dismissive way, but in a loving one. It helps you hold space for your own emotions the same way you would for someone else, with care, with clarity, without clinging. You also stop trying to manage everyone's emotions. You no longer see someone's distress as a problem you must solve. You begin to trust in their process. You offer compassion, but you don't micromanage their healing. This gives people room to grow. It respects their path, and it frees you from the exhausting task of carrying more than you were meant to. This level of care doesn't come from a textbook. It comes from practice, from making mistakes, from overextending, from learning where your edge is, and from returning to that balance point again and again, not perfectly, but mindfully. Equanimity is not about being emotionally flat. It's about being emotionally steady. It doesn't remove your heart, it protects it. It keeps you open without making you vulnerable to collapse. It keeps you generous without making you a martyr. It teaches you to stay soft, but not absorbent. When you practice this daily, you begin to feel the difference in your nervous system. There's more breath, more spaciousness, more permission to pause before reacting. You start to notice the early signs of overwhelm, and instead of pushing through, you return to your anchor. This makes your compassion deeper, not less, but more resilient. In this way, you become a force of calm in a frantic world, not by trying to be perfect, but by staying connected to your own center. People feel that, they trust that, and that trust allows you to serve more honestly, more clearly, without losing yourself. Equanimity, then, is not the end of compassion. It's the foundation of it. It's what allows compassion to flow without being drained, what allows you to show up fully, again and again, without burning out. The more you stay rooted in equanimity, the more clearly you see how your actions affect the world, and how the world affects you. You stop being pulled into emotional whirlpools. You no longer give just to be seen or fix others, and you finally start responding from steadiness rather than from reflex. But the question still lingers beneath the surface. Why do these patterns keep repeating? Why do you find yourself falling into the same reactions even when you know better? That's where karma comes in, not as punishment, not as superstition, but as cause and effect, as habit, as the grooves your mind runs along without even trying. Karma, in its original sense, means action, but not just action in the external world. It means intention. It means where your mind goes before your hands move, before your words form, before your decisions land. It's not about a cosmic scoreboard. It's about momentum. Your reactions today shape your responses tomorrow, and the more often you repeat a pattern, the more likely it is to repeat again. This is karma, not as mystery, but as mechanism. Every moment you react from anger, fear, greed, or insecurity, you deepen that neural path. You make it easier for the same reaction to arise the next time. You're not being punished, you're being conditioned. And that conditioning can feel like destiny unless you see it clearly. But once you do, a new door opens. You begin to understand that your future isn't written in stone, it's written in attention. Your attention is your steering wheel. Where it goes, energy flows. When you're not mindful of it, it follows old grooves. But when you bring awareness to the moment before the reaction, something powerful happens. You interrupt the cycle. You choose presence instead of programming. And with every choice, you start carving a new path. This is what it means to rewire karma, not by force, not through guilt, but through micro movements of awareness. You pause before you snap. You breathe before you judge. You soften before you defend. These are small acts, but they change everything, because each one plants a different kind of seed, and karma is nothing but the fruit of seeds you plant over time. This makes karma deeply personal, but also completely impersonal. It's not about morality as reward and punishment. It's about pattern and potential. The law of karma is not a courtroom, it's a mirror. It reflects your inner state. It shows you what you've been rehearsing unconsciously. And when you start looking into that mirror without shame, you begin to see not just your habits, but your capacity to change. That change begins with intention. Not the big dramatic ones, but the ones you barely notice. The intention behind how you greet someone, how you listen, how you respond when you're tired. These subtle moments shape your path more than any single action, because karma works through repetition, not exception. Your daily tone becomes your future. This view also breaks the myth of good karma as something you can hoard. It's not about being nice so that good things happen. It's about living clearly so that your mind becomes lighter, so that your reactions become less automatic, so that your presence becomes more stable. Karma is not what happens to you. It's what happens in you when you're not paying attention, and what transforms in you when you are. And the transformation is real. The more you catch your own patterns, the more space you feel. You begin to notice that your first reaction is often the product of old wounds, not truth. That your impatience isn't who you are, it's what you learned. That your defensiveness isn't strength, it's a memory of pain trying to protect itself. Karma is all these echoes, but awareness is the silence that follows. It's what breaks the chain. That silence is where new choices are born. When you're not caught in your history, you start responding to what's actually in front of you. You speak more honestly. You listen more openly. You move through the world with less resistance, and that changes your inner environment, which in turn changes your outer reality. Because your karma doesn't just shape how you feel, it shapes how you treat others, and how others treat you. The energy you bring to a room shifts the room. If your thoughts are harsh, your words follow. If your attention is scattered, your presence feels thin. But if your awareness is clear, people can feel it. They trust it. And relationships begin to change, not because you're manipulating outcomes, but because you're changing your input. Even how you speak to yourself is karma. Every time you criticize yourself harshly, you strengthen the belief that you're broken. Every time you meet yourself with patience, you plant the seed of self-trust. This is karma at its most intimate, how you relate to your own mind. And it applies to joy too. Joy is not just something that happens, it's something you build. If your attention is always on what's missing, you reinforce lack. If your attention is trained on small gratitude, on beauty, on breath, you reinforce abundance. Your habits of mind become your experience of life. Karma is not some ledger in the sky. It's the emotional environment you recreate every day with your focus. This is why Buddhist practice puts such emphasis on mindfulness. Because without it, karma runs your life. Not because you're bad, but because you're unaware. You get swept by moods. You believe every thought. You react without question. But with mindfulness, you begin to slow down the loop. You stop feeding the thoughts that hurt. You stop reacting to every impulse, and the grooves start to soften. Meditation is a training ground for this. Every time you sit and watch your mind wander and gently bring it back, you're practicing karmic redirection. You're not erasing your past, you're shaping your future. You're teaching your mind to choose presence over habit, and that choice adds up. This path also brings humility, because when you see that others are caught in their karma just like you, your judgment softens. You realize that their behavior comes from conditioning, not character. Their reactivity comes from habit, not intention. This doesn't excuse harm, but it explains it. And that explanation gives rise to compassion. It also helps you forgive yourself, not by denying your mistakes, but by understanding them. You see how your own reactions were shaped by causes and conditions, by fear, by misunderstanding, by lack of awareness. And once you see that, you stop identifying with the past. You stop clinging to guilt as identity. You take responsibility, not as a burden, but as a power. Because the real teaching of karma is not that you're stuck, it's that you're participating. Every moment you're shaping your trajectory. Every breath, every thought, every choice adds weight to a certain direction. And that direction is yours to adjust, one tiny intention at a time. This understanding shifts how you set goals too. You stop aiming for massive changes overnight. You start focusing on today, on how you meet this task, this conversation, this discomfort. You know that change doesn't happen by force, it happens by repetition, and you trust that small efforts, consistently applied, reshape your path. It also brings clarity to what matters, because you realize that it's not about accumulating achievements or recognition, it's about tending to your inner patterns, so you focus on what kind of person you're becoming. Are you growing more patient, more generous, more truthful? These questions guide you more than external milestones. Over time, this kind of awareness becomes your new default. Not perfect, but persistent. You still get triggered, but you catch it faster. You still fall into old grooves, but you don't stay there as long. And that difference makes all the difference, because your life is not made of what happens. It's made of how you meet what happens. And when you meet it with clarity, kindness, and awareness, you stop being a victim of karma. You start being a participant in awakening, not in theory, in each thought, in each pause, in each breath that brings you back to now. When you start noticing how every moment of awareness shapes your karma, something clicks. You realize that your mind is not just reacting, it's rehearsing. Every thought strengthens a direction. Every repeated emotion carves a deeper groove. You're not just experiencing life, you're actively shaping it through how you meet each moment. But even as you deepen that awareness, one force often pulls you back into loops. Your thinking mind, its need for control, its love of logic, its obsession with answers. And sometimes the only way out of that trap isn't more thought, but something that breaks the pattern completely. This is where Zen offers one of its most powerful and misunderstood tools, the koan. On the surface, a koan looks like a riddle, a question with no answer, a phrase that seems impossible to solve. But a koan isn't a puzzle. It's a mirror. It reflects back the limits of thinking and points you towards something far more direct. Not an idea, an experience, a kind of knowing that lives beyond the reach of logic. Take the classic. What is the sound of one hand clapping? The mind immediately tries to figure it out. It wants an answer. It wants resolution. But there is none, not in the usual sense. That's the point. The koan is not there to give you something to solve. It's there to short-circuit the machine that always tries to solve everything. It's designed to collapse the part of you that thinks awakening can be thought into. Because real insight doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes from letting go, from dropping beneath the need to know, from touching a space of silence that cannot be reached by words. That silence isn't empty, it's alive. And koans are one of the fastest ways to fall into it, if you let them work on you. The practice is simple but strange. You sit with the koan, not trying to analyze it, not trying to win. You let it echo in your mind, like a bell that never stops ringing. You listen, not for a solution, but for what the question reveals about how your mind clings to answers. Over time, you stop relating to the koan as a question at all. It becomes a mirror for your own stuckness, your own resistance, your own noise. This is why teachers often give koans as a kind of medicine, not to confuse, but to clear, not to frustrate, but to point out the futility of chasing truth with language. When you hit that wall, When you truly realize that your best thinking can't take you where you want to go, something lets go. And that's the opening. Koans don't work through explanation. They work through disruption. They interrupt your mental habits. They reveal where your logic ends and presence begins. They ask you to feel your way, not think your way. And the feeling they evoke is not comfort, it's confusion, disorientation, even mild shock. But that shock is useful. It jolts you out of the usual groove. Think of the mind like a snow globe, constantly swirling with thoughts, judgments, interpretations. A koan is like shaking it hard enough that the patterns break, and in that brief pause, you might catch a glimpse of what's behind all of it. A kind of raw, direct awareness that was always there, but always overlooked. Some koans are questions. Who am I? What was your original face before your parents were born? Others are dialogues. A master says something strange, the student replies, and none of it makes sense, unless you're listening from stillness, not from analysis. That's the shift koans create. They move you from mental speed to embodied attention. When you hear a koan that rattles you, don't rush to explain it. Sit with it. Feel how your body reacts. Where do you tense up? What do you want to do? Argue, dismiss, solve? That reaction is the koan doing its work. It's revealing your habitual responses. And by staying present with those responses, you start to loosen them. Over time, your relationship to thought itself begins to change. You see how most thoughts aren't actually helping you see clearly. They're helping you avoid what's uncomfortable. Koans interrupt that avoidance. They drop you into the discomfort and invite you to stay, not to suffer, but to wake up. This isn't about passivity. It's about a deeper kind of engagement, one that doesn't rely on control, one that doesn't need certainty, one that trusts the silence more than the sentence. That kind of trust takes time to develop because it's so different from how we're trained. We're taught that clarity comes from answers, but Zen shows that real clarity often comes after answers fall away. Koans are not about what you believe. They're about how you meet the unknown. When you sit with a koan long enough, it stops being a problem and starts being a presence. You stop looking for an answer and start letting it shape you. And slowly, your whole approach to life changes. You begin to carry that same openness into daily moments. You stop needing everything to make sense right away. You stop rushing to resolve discomfort. You start allowing questions to remain open without anxiety. That openness is not weakness, it's space. Space where insight can arise on its own. Even outside formal practice, koans have a way of showing up. Life itself becomes a kind of koan. You face something you can't control. You're asked to respond to uncertainty. You're thrown into contradiction, and in that moment, you either collapse into old patterns or you stay with the not knowing. That's the heart of Zen, staying with the not knowing, not in confusion, but in presence, not to escape meaning, but to discover a deeper one, not built from words, but from experience. Koans also humble the ego. They show you that your mind, brilliant as it may be, is not the source of peace, that even your most convincing thoughts can be noise. And when you see that clearly, something relaxes. You no longer need to win every argument, solve every mystery, or understand everything all the time. You can rest in what's here, and in that rest, something strange happens. Insights arise, not because you forced them, but because you got out of the way. The mind, when quiet, reveals truths that words can only point toward, and koans train you in that quiet. Some people resist koans because they don't get them, but that's the point. You're not supposed to get them in the usual way. You're supposed to let them get you, to let them rearrange something inside you, to let them show you where your logic ends and your life begins. This practice also rewires your relationship to effort. You stop straining for results. You stop needing things to wrap up neatly. You begin to value curiosity over conclusion, wonder over explanation. You learn how to live in questions without fear, and that changes everything. Because the more comfortable you are in the unknown, the less you suffer. The more you trust silence, the less you need certainty. And the more you can meet each moment, not with a map, but with attention. Koans are not shortcuts to awakening, but they are accelerators. They shake you loose. They bring your habitual patterns to the surface. And if you stay with them, they teach you how to drop what no longer serves. Not through effort, but through insight. And what's left when the thinking mind gets quiet? Just this moment, this breath, this awareness that needs no explanation to be whole. When you begin to sit with the not knowing that koans awaken, something surprising occurs. You stop trying to fix life with thinking, and you start feeling it directly. No filter, no interpretation, just raw experience. The mind quiets, not because it gives up, but because it surrenders to something more honest than words. And in that silence, the present moment becomes vivid, alive. But that kind of presence doesn't only come through mental effort, it's also sensory. And the senses you tend to overlook are the ones that often pull you back into the now the fastest. Most people speak of mindfulness through breath or posture, but awareness is not limited to breath and body. Your experience is being shaped constantly by other signals, scents floating in the air, subtle vibrations against your skin, the faintest change in light at the corner of your vision. You live in a flood of sensation. The question is, are you paying attention? The forgotten senses, smell, texture, sound depth, peripheral vision, spatial awareness, are not less important. They're just less trained. Because modern life pulls your focus into screens, speech and thought, the body's full sensitivity goes unnoticed. But when you start tuning back into those neglected pathways, your awareness expands immediately. You become more grounded, not through effort, but through contact. Start with scent. The nose is a direct line into memory and emotion. A single smell can transport you across decades, collapse time, dissolve stories. And yet, how often do you breathe in your surroundings? Really notice the subtle notes in the air. When you begin to explore the present through scent, mindfulness becomes more than watching your thoughts. It becomes a full-body return. You don't need incense or essential oils. Just pay attention to what's already here. The scent of the room, of your clothes, of the outdoors. Let smell become an anchor, not as a technique, but as presence. Scent changes constantly, slightly with each breath, each shift in the air. By following it, your mind becomes more alert, less trapped in repetition. Touch is another forgotten teacher. Not just contact, but texture. The feel of cloth against your skin, the way your hands rest, the sensation of temperature, pressure, movement. Instead of only observing posture, notice the details. Is your back cool or warm? Is your hand pressing against your leg or resting lightly? These small details bring you out of mental drift and into grounded awareness. When the mind is anxious, it races forward. It leaves the body behind. But texture, felt intentionally, pulls it back. You can't touch the future. You can only touch what's here. So when the mind speeds up, slow it down by touching something real. Let your fingers trace the edge of a cup. Let your feet feel the floor. Let texture bring you back. Sound is often present, but rarely heard. Most of the time, it becomes background noise or distraction. But sound, when fully received, becomes one of the most direct doors to mindfulness. Not just music or voices, but subtle shifts, the rustle of fabric, the hum of electricity, the distant traffic, the rhythm of your own breath. When you open your hearing fully, you stop trying to control awareness. You let sound enter without grasping it. That's a form of surrender. And in that surrender, you start to notice layers, volume, pitch, rhythm, silence between sounds. These layers aren't mental, they're sensory, and exploring them requires no belief, just listening. Peripheral vision is another sense often ignored. You stare straight ahead, locked into the center of your field, and forget that your awareness spans wide. Peripheral vision holds movement, light changes, shadow play. When you open it intentionally, your nervous system settles. Why? Because peripheral vision tells the body it's safe. Predators don't live in the center, they creep at the edges. So when you soften your gaze and widen your view, your body relaxes. This isn't a trick, it's biological. Narrow focus triggers alertness. Wide focus supports calm. So when your mind starts racing, try shifting how you see. Not what you see, how. Let your awareness open like a bowl, not a laser. Let light move through you instead of grabbing it. That soft gaze isn't passive, it's presence without force. Then there's spatial awareness, your sense of where your body is in space. This too is a sense, though not often named. It's how you know if you're upright, tilted, leaning. It's how you navigate without thinking. Bringing attention to it grounds you instantly. When your mind feels untethered, ask, where is my weight? What part of me touches the ground? Where is front, back, up, down? These questions don't require analysis, just feeling. Spatial awareness brings you back to the body as a whole, not a collection of parts. And in that wholeness, anxiety softens. You stop hovering in your head and start living in your body again. All these senses are not separate. They're always working together. But when you tune into the ones you usually ignore, your field of awareness expands. You begin to feel more connected, not just to yourself, but to the world around you. And that connection becomes an antidote to mental drift. Because so often, mental suffering is a product of disconnection. You get stuck in loops of thought because you've lost contact with direct experience. You treat your life as an idea instead of a felt reality. The senses pull you back, not to escape, but to return to what's actually here. And what's here is enough. Not perfect, not fixed, but alive. Even in pain, there is sensation to explore. Even in boredom, there are details to feel. The more finely tuned your attention becomes, the more depth you find in the ordinary. And that depth becomes its own kind of peace, not because it removes chaos, but because it gives you an anchor inside it. You begin to walk through life differently, not just thinking about presence, but living it. You open the door and notice the shift in temperature. You sip tea and notice the texture of heat. You stand in line and feel the pattern of light, not as a technique, but as a way of being. The senses become your meditation cushion, your bell, your reminder. And the beauty of this practice is that it requires no effort to start. You don't need to change your schedule, you just shift your attention. From the abstract to the actual, from concept to contact, from thought to touch. That shift is tiny, but powerful, because in that shift, you begin to see that everything you were looking for in some distant future is already present, not in your thoughts, but in your senses. The scent of a moment, the feeling of now, the texture of real life fully experienced. The more you reconnect with the forgotten senses, the more alive each moment becomes. You stop walking through your life in a fog of thought and start tuning into the texture of now. You hear more, feel more, sense more, and yet the world doesn't get louder. It gets clearer, because when your attention deepens, your need for mental noise fades. But even as awareness sharpens, something stubborn often returns, the pull back into old patterns, reactions that repeat, thoughts that loop, emotions that seem to have a script of their own. They creep in quietly, dressed like common habits, but they're something much deeper. They're samsara on a micro level. Most people think of samsara as the grand wheel of rebirth, a cycle of lives, deaths, and reincarnations stretching across time. But samsara doesn't only exist in some cosmic mythological sense. It happens every day, every hour, every moment. It happens every time your mind circles back to the same craving, the same fear, the same irritation, and treats it like truth. It happens every time you lose awareness and follow a familiar pattern without question. These are the tiny samsaras, mini cycles of suffering that play out inside your own thoughts and choices. And they're subtle. They don't always look like obvious pain. Sometimes they look like comfort, like predictability, like the story you've always told yourself about who you are and how life works. They show up in your habits, your defenses, your resistance to change, and because they're familiar, you believe them. But once you start to see them clearly, everything begins to shift. You realize that suffering doesn't just come from major events. It comes from the repetition of unconscious choices, the way you shut down during conflict, the way you reach for distraction when discomfort rises, the way you explain away your patterns instead of watching them. And the moment you start watching is the moment samsara weakens, not because it disappears, but because you stop feeding it with blindness. That's what mindfulness really is: clear seeing, noticing what you do before you do it, noticing what you feel before it owns you, noticing how you talk to yourself when no one is listening. The habits you've rehearsed are not who you are, they're just momentum, and momentum can be slowed. To do that, you begin by noticing loops, not big ones, small ones. How do you react to silence, to praise, to waiting, to feeling ignored? There are tiny feedback loops in each. When you start becoming aware of those, you no longer react automatically. You start catching the wheel in motion. This noticing begins in the body. Samsara is not just mental, it's physiological. When a loop is about to repeat, your body gives early signals: a tightness in the jaw, a clench in the chest, a tensing of the gut. These are the starting lines of suffering. Most people miss them. They jump straight to the reaction. But if you can feel the tension before the story builds, you can stop the loop before it spirals. You also learn to watch your language, not just how you talk out loud, but how you talk inside. Tiny samsaras live in phrases like, "Here we go again," or "That's just the way I am," or "Nothing ever changes." These aren't facts, they're scripts, and repeating them strengthens the identity that feeds the cycle. Noticing those inner narratives is a powerful practice, because once you hear them clearly, you can begin to drop them. And what do you drop them into? Presence, breath, ground. That's how the cycle breaks, not by fighting, but by returning, not by force, but by softness. You're not trying to erase the habit, you're learning not to follow it. Again and again the thought appears. Again and again you don't react. That's liberation, one moment at a time. It's not dramatic. In fact, it's often quiet. The victory comes not when you stop having difficult thoughts, But when you stop believing they own you, the freedom comes not when pain disappears, but when you stop turning it into identity. Samsara feeds on identification. The moment you say, "This is me," the cycle tightens. The moment you say, "This is a pattern arising," it loosens. There's a kind of gentle ruthlessness to this practice. You become less interested in your own stories. You stop needing to explain why you feel what you feel. You just feel it, watch it, let it move, and in that space you begin to sense what's underneath the repetition, a quiet intelligence that doesn't need to react, doesn't need to prove, doesn't need to cling. This is not detachment, it's maturity, the kind that comes from seeing the same loop enough times to stop believing it's new. You don't need to fix every emotion. You don't need to change every thought. You just need to stop recycling them as truth. And this isn't just about suffering, it's about pleasure too. Tiny samsaras hide inside craving, the way you chase stimulation, the way you need your phone, the way you overreach for comfort and then feel the subtle exhaustion that follows. Even happiness can become a loop if you're clinging to it, if you can't let it pass naturally. The moment you grasp, samsara begins again. But when you see clearly, you don't have to renounce joy, you just stop trying to trap it. You enjoy it without attachment. You feel it without control. And that freedom makes it deeper, because now it's real, not manufactured. Spotting tiny samsaras also requires humility. You'll find them in places you thought were resolved, in conversations you've had 100 times, in roles you thought you'd outgrown. They're sneaky. They don't need a reason. They just need momentum. But every time you notice one and pause, that momentum weakens. And over time, you build a new kind of momentum. One rooted in awareness. One that doesn't spiral, but settles. You stop running away from yourself. You stop being surprised by your own mind. You begin to welcome each habit as a teacher, not to indulge it, but to observe it until it no longer holds power. This is what makes Buddhist practice so transformative. It doesn't ask you to destroy your mind. It asks you to understand it, to meet it with compassion, but not obedience. And through that, to build a life that's no longer ruled by repetition. Eventually, you'll start seeing samsara in others too, not to judge them, but to recognize the shared pattern. You'll see how they spin in their loops, just like you, and that recognition becomes compassion, because you know how hard it is to stop, and you know how beautiful it is when you do. Once you begin to catch the small loops, those micro samsaras that sneak into your habits, reactions, and emotional defaults, you start to feel something lift. The weight of being stuck softens. You notice that you're not always as trapped as you thought you were. And more importantly, you start to see that it was never about some huge dramatic escape. It was about seeing clearly, again and again, right in the middle of your ordinary day. The moment you start living from that clarity, the more you realize it can be guided, not by rules, not by belief, but by understanding. That's where the 3 marks of existence become more than just Buddhist theory. They become your checklist for peace. These 3 truths, impermanence, suffering, and non-self, are not ideas to memorize. They're not meant for debate. They're tools, practical ones. They help you navigate every choice, every interaction, every shift of emotion. They're lenses that show you where to hold on and where to release, where to stay and where to move, where to soften and where to see deeper. They are not meant to scare you. They're meant to free you. Start with impermanence, not as a poetic idea, but as a constant. Everything shifts, everything breathes, every thought, every mood, every relationship, every season, every ache in your body. You've seen this already. But how often do you forget? How often do you treat your sadness like it's permanent? How often do you grasp at joy as if it will never leave? When you forget impermanence, you suffer, not because life is cruel, but because your expectation clashes with reality. You want the good to last and the bad to go quickly, but neither moves on your timeline. The moment you start remembering that everything changes, your tight grip loosens. You breathe a little easier. You let joy arise without panic. You let pain pass without dramatizing it. This becomes a moment-to-moment practice. You wake up tired. You remind yourself, this will pass. You feel elated. You know, this too is temporary. Someone frustrates you. You remember, this moment is a ripple, not a flood. You stop freezing life into labels and start letting it move. Impermanence also helps you love more deeply, because when you know that everything is passing, you start paying attention. You stop postponing presence. You say what matters. You listen with your whole attention. You don't take people for granted, not because you're afraid, but because you're awake. Then there's dukkha, often translated as suffering, but more accurately as unsatisfactoriness. It's the restlessness, the friction, the sense that even good things don't quite land the way you hoped. You get what you want, but it doesn't complete you. You plan something beautiful, but part of you is still tense. Even in comfort, there's a quiet discomfort. Dukkha isn't punishment, it's a signal. It tells you that clinging doesn't lead where you think it will. It shows up every time you expect stability from what is unstable. Every time you try to make a relationship perfect. Every time you demand certainty from life. The tighter you hold, the louder the friction. When you understand dukkha, you don't become cynical. You become free. You stop trying to extract permanent happiness from things that can't give it. You enjoy experiences, but you don't rely on them. You let people be who they are without needing them to fill your emptiness. You stop expecting life to remove all discomfort and start learning how to stay present with it. You begin to ask better questions, not, how do I make this feel better instantly, but what am I expecting this to do for me? Not, how do I fix this emotion, but what is this emotion showing me about my attachment? This level of inquiry softens reactivity. You stop running and you start observing. You stop demanding and you start listening. Then there's the third mark, anatta, or non-self. Maybe the most misunderstood, but also the most liberating. It doesn't mean you don't exist. It means you are not as fixed or separate as you think. Your sense of I is constantly changing, shaped by mood, memory, surroundings, language, culture. What you call me is a process, not a thing. When you feel hurt, the mind says, they disrespected me. When you feel anxious, the mind says, I am weak. But look closer. What is this me that keeps showing up? Is it in your thoughts, your body, your roles? And if it keeps changing, how can it be solid? Non-self isn't an idea to agree with. It's a truth to explore. You begin noticing how often you defend your identity without meaning to, how you react when someone challenges your opinion, how you tighten when things don't align with your image of yourself. Every time you feel insulted or proud or ashamed, there's a self being protected. But when you soften that grip, a strange thing happens. You don't become less human. You become more at peace. You no longer need to prove anything. You stop reacting to every threat to your ego. You speak more clearly because you're not speaking from a performance. You listen more deeply because you're not listening for validation. You live more freely because you're not trying to defend a fragile idea of who you are. This doesn't mean you erase your personality or preferences. It means you stop being controlled by them. You still care about your values. You still show up fully. But now you're flexible, you're fluid, you're not trapped in your story. And that flexibility makes life easier, not harder. These three marks, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self, are not abstract teachings. They are tools. You use them when you're stuck in conflict, when you're gripped by fear, when you're chasing something that doesn't satisfy. They guide your attention back to what matters. You begin using them like a checklist, not rigidly, but as support. You ask, is this permanent? No. So can I stop clinging? Is this satisfying in the deepest way? No. So can I stop expecting it to save me? Is this reaction coming from a fixed self-image? Yes. So can I meet it with more space? These questions don't fix life, but they clarify it. They give you a framework that holds steady even when your emotions do not. They remind you that every experience is workable, that you're not trapped, that peace is not the absence of suffering, but the presence of wisdom. You start to notice that peace isn't something you find once and keep forever. It's something you return to again and again using awareness. You feel anger, you check for impermanence. You feel emptiness, you check for craving. You feel ego flare up, you check for identification. Each check-in is an act of remembering. And over time, this remembering becomes your habit. Not forced, not robotic, but natural. You see change more easily. You let go more gently. You laugh at yourself more often. You stop turning every pain into a story about failure and start turning it into a moment of practice. Because this isn't about being above suffering, it's about being with it in a different way. A way that doesn't amplify it. A way that doesn't resist it. A way that turns each difficult moment into a chance to wake up. And eventually, this understanding permeates everything. Not just meditation, not just spiritual talks, but your relationships, your work, your quiet moments, your responses to life. You stop chasing peace and you start living from it. When you begin to live from the clarity that the three marks of existence offer, something starts to unwind inside you. You stop gripping so tightly. You respond with more fluidity. You walk through your day with fewer demands on how things should be. And yet, beneath all this understanding, another voice often lingers. A quieter one, but sharper. One that doesn't care how much you've studied or how aware you've become. It waits for the first mistake, the smallest failure, and then it strikes. You should have done better. You're not enough. Why are you still like this? That voice is the inner critic, and no matter how far your practice takes you, it doesn't fully quiet until it's met with something deeper than discipline. It needs to be met with kindness. This part of the practice isn't glamorous. It doesn't carry the mystery of Zen riddles or the structure of philosophical insight, but it is essential. Because as long as your inner voice remains hard, shame continues to sit in the background, shaping how you show up. You can look calm, speak clearly, even help others. But if the voice in your head keeps telling you that you're failing, peace won't last. True transformation happens not just when your thoughts slow down, but when your relationship to yourself softens. Buddhism doesn't avoid this truth. It meets it with direct, embodied practices that go right to the root of self-judgment. The first of these is metta, or loving kindness, not as a sweet idea, but as a deliberate reconditioning of the mind. Metta isn't about pretending you feel love when you don't. It's about planting new phrases in your inner monologue. Simple phrases, repeated with attention. May I be well. May I be safe. May I be kind to myself. Over and over, even if they feel hollow at first. This repetition is not for comfort. It's for rewiring. Your inner critic didn't arise out of nowhere. It formed from years of hearing what you weren't. from moments of shame, comparison, punishment, and unmet expectations. These became mental grooves, and now your mind follows them out of habit. Metta lays new tracks, not by erasing the old, but by creating options, by giving your mind a new voice to reach for when the old one starts shouting. This doesn't happen quickly. At first it feels fake. You'll say, "May I be kind to myself?" And the critic will laugh. It'll say, "Kind? You? After today?" That's normal. That's part of the resistance. But you say it anyway. You sit there and you say the words not because you believe them, but because they're medicine. They work slowly. They work through trust. They work through repetition. As you continue, you might notice tension. Sometimes the heart resists more kindness than it does pain. Why? Because kindness can feel unfamiliar. It opens something tight. It shines light into corners where the critic was hiding. But if you stay with it, even through discomfort, something begins to shift. You start hearing your own voice in a new tone, softer, slower, less sharp around the edges. The next tool is mudita, sympathetic joy. This one works indirectly. While metta addresses how you speak to yourself, mudita heals the comparison that often fuels the critic. Because often, self-judgment is amplified when you see others succeed, when their joy feels like proof of your failure. Mudita flips that. It trains the mind to celebrate others, not to diminish yourself, but to expand your capacity for joy. This practice might feel strange at first. You might sit in meditation and say, "May others be joyful. May they succeed. May they thrive." And a part of you might cringe, not because you're cruel, but because your own unmet needs rise to the surface. That's where the practice begins. Mudita doesn't require you to feel perfect joy. It just asks you to stop feeding resentment. You start small. You hear someone you care about has good news. Instead of shrinking into jealousy, you breathe. You whisper, "I'm happy for them." Even if you don't fully mean it, you do it again next time. You keep doing it until something in you loosens, until joy stops feeling like a zero-sum game, until you start to believe that someone else's light doesn't make yours dimmer. Metta and mudita work together. One softens your view of yourself, the other softens your view of others. And as both grow, the critic has less space to thrive. It doesn't disappear overnight, but it weakens. It speaks less often, and when it does, you don't believe it as easily. You also begin to listen more closely to how the critic operates. Its language is rigid. It uses absolutes, always, never, again, failure. It thrives on extremes. It speaks in a tone that doesn't allow nuance or forgiveness. And once you start recognizing that tone, you begin to disidentify from it. You say, "That's a pattern. That's not the truth." You also start seeing where the critic came from, whose voice it echoes, what moment it first emerged from. Not to dwell on the past, but to understand the shape of your conditioning. And with that understanding, you grow compassion, not just for yourself now, but for the version of you who built those defenses out of survival. This compassion expands into how you meet your mistakes. Instead of spiraling into shame, you start pausing. You ask, "What do I need right now?" Not, "How could I be so stupid?" Not, "What's wrong with me?" Just that simple question, "What do I need?" That question itself begins to undo the shame, because it treats you as someone worth caring for. This changes how you set goals, how you speak in relationships, how you navigate challenge. You no longer motivate yourself through self-attack. You start moving from care, not critique, from encouragement, not pressure. This shift doesn't make you lazy, it makes you resilient, because now your energy isn't spent fighting yourself. You also learn how to create small rituals of kindness, not grand gestures, small ones. Breathing gently when you're overwhelmed, placing your hand on your heart during tension, saying, "It's okay," before sleep. These gestures train your nervous system to feel safe. They rewire you on levels deeper than thought. Over time, a new voice forms. It doesn't shout, it doesn't judge. It reminds, it soothes. It says, "You're trying, you're learning, you're allowed to be human." And that voice becomes louder, not because you force it, but because you feed it. Eventually, you stop needing to believe the inner critic to feel secure. You can hear it without merging with it. You can smile at it without obeying it. And that separation gives you space to live more honestly. You stop hiding behind performance. You stop shrinking when you make a mistake. You let yourself take up space, not because you're better than anyone, but because you're no longer punishing yourself for being imperfect. This is how you return to wholeness, not by eliminating every flaw, but by removing the shame around them, not by becoming someone else, but by meeting yourself fully, kindly, now. Once your inner critic begins to soften, once your relationship with yourself becomes more honest and gentle, something profound happens beneath the surface. You begin to move through life with less resistance. You stop rushing to fix your emotions. You stop beating yourself up for being human. But even as this new kindness grows, there's still a pressure you may feel without realizing it, a pressure that hums in the background of your days. It's not coming from your thoughts or your judgments, it's coming from the ticking of the clock, the deadlines, the schedules, the constant sense that you're running out of time, that if you don't hurry, you'll fall behind. This pressure shapes your mood, your choices, and your nervous system more than you might think. But what if it's based on a misunderstanding? What if time, as you've been taught to experience it, isn't as solid as it seems? In Buddhist teaching, time is not treated as ultimate reality. It's seen as a concept, useful for communication, for organizing life, but not real in the way the mind assumes. The stress that arises from time pressure doesn't come from time itself. It comes from how you relate to it. It comes from the belief that there's a fixed pace to life and that you're always behind it. But when you start to examine that belief, when you begin to train the mind to experience moments instead of measuring them, a new kind of presence opens. That presence doesn't live on a schedule. It doesn't divide life into hours, minutes, and years. It simply shows up, fully, now. And the more you return to it, the more you realize that the stress you've carried wasn't because you didn't have enough time. It was because you weren't in touch with the timeless. The first step is to notice how the idea of time creates anxiety. You wake up and your brain already starts planning what needs to be done, what hasn't been done, how long each task will take. Before your feet even touch the ground, you're calculating, and those calculations carry an emotional weight. They whisper, "You're behind, you're late, you're not doing enough." But none of those thoughts are rooted in what's actually happening right now. They're based on projection, on a mental timeline that your body is expected to keep up with. This timeline isn't neutral. It's shaped by culture, by habits, by unconscious expectations. You've been trained to believe that a productive day is a good day, that the more you do, the more you matter. That time is something to beat, manage, or control. But Buddhism invites you to see that time isn't a race, it's an illusion. Or more accurately, it's a tool. And like any tool, it can be helpful or harmful, depending on how you use it. Mindfulness reveals this. When you're fully present, you're not thinking about what's next. You're not replaying what just happened. You're simply here. And in that space, the concept of time begins to dissolve. You may have experienced this without realizing it, during meditation, in nature, while listening deeply. The sense of minutes passing disappears, and in its place, a sense of fullness arises. That fullness isn't the absence of time. It's the experience of wholeness that doesn't need time to feel complete. Buddhist practice trains you to rest in that timeless space more often, not as escape, but as clarity. When you're not enslaved by the clock, your nervous system calms down. You begin to breathe more freely. You make choices from presence, not pressure. You work more smoothly because you're not rushing. You connect more deeply because you're not multitasking. This isn't about doing less, it's about doing from a different state of being. Even your to-do list changes when time pressure dissolves. You stop approaching tasks with panic. You begin to move with rhythm instead of force. You no longer see pauses as waste. You see them as part of the flow, and that shift creates energy, not drains it. This doesn't mean you ignore the practical world. Appointments still exist. Responsibilities remain. But your relationship to them changes. You stop letting time dictate your worth. You stop letting urgency override wisdom. You start checking in with presence before checking the clock. In Buddhism, there's the concept of timeless awareness, a state where the mind is open, still, and responsive. It's not bound by the past or the future. It sees clearly what's here without needing to turn it into a story. That awareness is always available. It's not created, it's remembered. And the more you practice returning to it, the more stable it becomes. This kind of presence also heals your relationship with aging. So much stress around time is tied to age, what you should have accomplished by now, how much time you have left. But those are just thoughts. Mental math built on comparison. When you meet the moment fully, age becomes a number, not an identity. You stop measuring your life in milestones and start living it in breaths. This shift also changes how you relate to others. You stop rushing through conversations. You stop waiting for people to finish speaking so you can move on. You become more patient, not because you're trying to be kind, but because you're actually here, fully. And people feel that. Your presence becomes an offering. You'll also begin to notice how much of your anxiety is based on imagined timelines, the belief that you're late to find purpose, that you're behind in healing, that your peace should have come by now. But peace doesn't come by deadline. It comes when the chase stops. When you drop the story of being behind, you land right where you are. And where you are is where transformation happens. Meditation helps train this, not because it slows you down, but because it shows you what doesn't need to be rushed. You sit, and thoughts about time arise. You notice them. You don't follow. You come back, again and again. And in that return, the grip of the clock weakens. You stop measuring how long you've meditated. You stop checking how long it takes to feel calm. You begin to trust the space itself. This trust spills into your day. You stop needing to fit everything into a box. You stop judging your worth by productivity. You start trusting that your presence is enough, that your being is already aligned, that urgency isn't always accurate. You also start creating a new rhythm, one based on attention, not ambition. You do what needs to be done, but not from anxiety. You begin your day not by racing, but by grounding. You check in with your breath before checking your phone. You allow transitions between tasks. You create buffers for stillness, not because you have extra time, but because you value clarity. This practice also reveals how often you sacrifice quality for speed, how often you do things quickly, not because they need to be done fast, but because discomfort arises when you slow down. That discomfort isn't time, it's habit. It's the body reacting to the story that fast means progress. But fast doesn't always mean aligned, and slow doesn't mean lazy. Mindfulness teaches you to feel your own pace and to trust it. As that trust grows, stress begins to lose its edge. Not because challenges disappear, but because your inner urgency is no longer inflamed by false pressure. You respond instead of reacting. You move from stability instead of from scarcity. And this doesn't just benefit you, it changes how others feel around you. Your calm becomes contagious. Your presence becomes a refuge. People feel less rushed in your presence, less judged, more seen. That's the power of stepping out of false time and into real awareness. Eventually, you begin to see that the present moment doesn't need to be managed. It needs to be inhabited. And that the more fully you inhabit it, the more time seems to expand. You get more done, but with less friction. You feel more alive, but with less chaos. You rest deeper, not because you're exhausted, but because your body is no longer fighting against the clock. This is how stress begins to unravel, not through escape, but through intimacy with the now. You stop chasing hours and start meeting moments. You stop asking, "How much time do I have?" and start asking, "How fully am I here?" When you begin to drop out of time pressure and return to presence, stress no longer dictates your worth. You breathe without rushing. You choose without panic. You let go of the need to measure every part of your life by a deadline. But even in that stillness, life doesn't wait. The world keeps moving. People still interrupt you. Things still break. Plans still go sideways. And that's where real practice begins. Not in perfect silence, but in the noise. Not in long retreats, but in the middle of your day when everything feels slightly off. That's where you face the true test of awareness. How do you meet frustration when it's fresh? Because it's easy to speak about peace in theory. It's much harder when you're stuck in traffic, someone cuts you off, your coffee spills, the internet drops during an important meeting, or your phone battery dies in the middle of a necessary call. But what if those moments weren't obstacles to peace? What if they were invitations? What if every annoyance, instead of being a reason to react, became a bell, a small chime asking, "Are you here, or are you lost again?" The truth is, you can't always control your environment. You can't schedule a calm life, but you can choose how you show up when things go wrong. And the Buddhist path was never meant for perfect conditions. It was made for this, for traffic jams, for missed flights, for impatient people, for the 1,000 little things that go against your expectations every single day. The first shift is recognizing that frustration begins in the mind before it lands in your body. A delay itself doesn't cause suffering. It's your relationship to the delay. The story that it shouldn't be happening. The belief that you're being blocked. The identity that says, "This is ruining my day." That's where tension forms. That's where reactivity builds. When you catch that thought early, you create a gap. And in that gap, you can choose to breathe, not to suppress your feelings, but to meet them with space, to remind yourself that this is exactly the kind of moment practice is made for. Not glamorous, not dramatic, just ordinary discomfort, asking to be witnessed instead of resisted. This is where mindfulness becomes real. You don't need a cushion. You don't need silence. You need one breath, one pause, one shift of attention. You're in line, it's not moving, and your chest tightens. Right there, you feel your feet. You exhale slowly. You stop rehearsing your complaints. You notice the colors around you. You listen. You anchor into now, not to escape, but to engage more clearly. Each time you do this, you start changing your baseline. You teach your nervous system that not every delay is danger, that not every inconvenience deserves urgency. You build new muscle memory, not in theory, but in traffic, in the checkout line, on the sidewalk when someone bumps into you without apology. This doesn't mean you stop feeling. Frustration still arises, but now you see it instead of becoming it. You name it without needing to fix it. You notice how quickly the mind wants to turn discomfort into blame. You watch how the story grows. They're so rude. This always happens to me. Nothing ever works. That's not the traffic talking. That's conditioning. And when you see it clearly, you don't have to follow it. This clarity also opens the door to compassion. You look at the driver who cut you off and wonder, what kind of day are they having? Not to excuse behavior, but to humanize it. You see the slow cashier not as a problem, but as a person. You stop turning people into characters in your drama. You meet them with a little more softness. And in that space, something shifts, not just in them, but in you. You also begin to see how reactive habits build on each other. You get cut off, then you snap at your partner. You're delayed, then you carry irritation into your next task. That's the chain of suffering. Buddhism calls it proliferation. One moment becomes many because it's not met clearly. But if you meet the first frustration mindfully, the chain stops. You feel the emotion. You breathe. You don't pass it on. This isn't passive. It's powerful. It's what breaks cycles. It's what keeps pain from turning into harm. And it requires practice, not once, but daily. You'll forget. You'll get caught. But each time you remember, you make that muscle stronger. There's also joy in this practice. Because once you stop needing life to be perfect to feel peace, you become more playful. You laugh at delays instead of tensing. You take a wrong turn and treat it as an adventure. You let someone go ahead of you in line, not to be noble, but because you're not in a race. That lightness doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've stopped carrying unnecessary weight. You also begin to find rhythms in chaos. You notice the sound of rain while stuck in traffic. You feel the warmth of the steering wheel. You pay attention to the breath instead of the red light. These details don't fix the situation, but they anchor you. They keep you from spiraling. And slowly, your definition of practice expands. It's no longer confined to meditation. Practice is how you speak when you're irritated, how you listen when you're bored, how you choose not to escalate a moment that doesn't need escalation. Practice becomes a way of moving through discomfort without turning it into identity. You'll notice how much energy is saved when you don't argue with reality, how much clearer you think when you're not fueled by resentment, how much softer your presence becomes when you stop needing to be right all the time. And over time, even your memory changes. You stop remembering the day by what went wrong. You remember how you stayed calm, how you found space, how you didn't collapse. That's not spiritual bypassing. That's presence. You also realize that nobody is trying to ruin your day. Most people are in their own heads, acting from their own stress. Your practice becomes not taking things personally, not absorbing every sharp word, not reacting just because someone else is reactive. Instead, you become a mirror, not reflecting their anger, but their humanity. You let them be as they are without needing to match their energy. You choose stillness without superiority. That choice is freedom. Eventually, these small choices become your character. Not because you're forcing yourself to be kind, but because kindness is what remains when you stop protecting your ego. You don't need people to behave a certain way for you to be at peace. You carry peace with you, even into chaos. You've just spent hours not just listening, but retraining your mind. You've touched silence that didn't demand words. You've questioned who you are beyond identity. You've learned how to shift emotions in seconds, break thoughts apart before they control you, and release the weight of needing more. You now know that desire starts as a whisper. That karma is your habit, not your fate. You've walked through death to find life. You've stopped mistaking moods for facts. You've discovered that balance lives in your body, that dreams can be training grounds, and that compassion can be powerful without draining you. You've seen how your inner critic can be replaced with a voice of gentle clarity. You've shattered the illusion of time and met the present as it is. You've learned that every inconvenience, yes, even traffic, isn't blocking your peace. It is your peace if you choose it. This was never just about falling asleep. This was about waking up, deeply, patiently, and permanently. Now it's your turn to carry these lessons into your life. Not perfectly, not all at once, but moment by moment, pattern by pattern, breath by breath. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're not too late. You're right on time, because you're here. If something shifted for you tonight, big or small, leave a comment below with the words, "I choose peace." Let's fill this space with people who are walking this path together, step by step. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another chance to reprogram your mind for clarity, stillness, and strength. Until next time, rest easy, stay awake, and walk gently.